All right. Archive 3, The Great Pyramid of Enoch. Writing on the wall. At Ukazan in Syriad, before the flood, the Sethites erected the Gizian monuments, covering them with texts of the wisdom, discovery of their time, and the knowledge of astronomy in the future. The Great Pyramid was a type of time capsule that protected and concealed an advanced yet original theology that was taken for granted by mankind in the antediluvian civilization. Upon the colossi were placed writings ordained by the Creator, given through Enoch for the purpose of surviving the destruction of the world. These were the secrets of the distant past, the present, and the worlds to come after the deluge, and far beyond, even into the years of the apocalypse and millennial epoch. As the largest book in the world, it has remained virtually intact even 48 centuries after its construction. The Greek and Roman historians, geographers, and writers 2,000 years ago and before perplexed over these monuments, gigantic works in the desert of Egypt. Many of them left to posterity their observations and writings. Their findings greatly contribute to our understanding of how the Great Pyramid originally appeared before it was defaced. By the testimony of ancient writers, the lower portions of the structure were covered with millions of tiny inscriptions that by the time of the Greeks were already impossible to translate. Most of the information we have studied concerning the writings up to the faces of the Great Pyramid have come from Hebraic, Egyptian, and various other traditions, but they are made believable by their correspondences, and we are not without substantiation from even more credible authorities. As far back as 440 BC, the Greek historian and traveler Herodotus of Halicarnassus eventually wandered into Egypt after traversing the Near East. He sought whatever knowledge he could gather from the antiquarian priesthoods of Egypt. It was there that he, in awe, beheld the majesty of the Great Pyramid. The account of his visual scrutiny of the edifice conveys that the casing stones were polished and white and covered in writings. He marveled at these casing blocks were perfectly fit together and polished. 1. Herodotus wrote that the joints between the casing stones were so close together as to scarcely be seen at all. Almost 400 years later, another famous scholar traveled to Egypt, Diodorus Siculus, who wrote that the Great Pyramid was indeed covered in beautiful white casing blocks. He further remarked that the structure possibly lacked a capstone, too. A few decades after Diodorus, the historian Strabo visited Giza in 24 BC and was struck by the enormity of the magnificent building. He too claimed that the monument was encased in white casing stones. Strabo wrote that the Great Pyramid was like a building let down from heaven untouched by human hands. 3. This is a startling statement, for in his days the structure was already over 27 centuries old. Strabo also wrote that the Egyptian priests knew of a secret door into the monument, a curiously hinged door disguised among the casing blocks on the north face of the structure that led into a descending corridor. Though this entrance has been rediscovered, there is evidence that the Egyptians had long before forgotten where it was located. This evidence is in the fact that there has never been found any authentic ancient Egyptian writings, relics, or objects inside the Great Pyramid. This is a topic for a later section. That the secret entrance could have been easily lost is now known because of its obscure placement on the north face, high up on the sloping face and not centered so as to prevent detection. Evidently, the priests for a long time passed down the tradition of the secret entrance, though they had lost its location. The Egyptians also told Herodotus that there was a chamber below the pyramid that would fill up with water from the Nile, but this, too, is but an elder knowledge passed down from earlier times when the secret door's location was known. As will be shown, many pyramid building cultures preserve this knowledge that a well or water source lied beneath the structure. Strabo's observation concerning the pyramid's appearance as a building let down from heaven is a very accurate description of the optical illusion created by the size of the monument when viewed from a great distance. Long ago, when it was covered by the gleaming white limestone amid a barren landscape of desert yellow and brown, the heat of the daytime sun on the dead earth visibly obscured the lower portions of the monument. Far away, the pyramid appeared to be floating above the solid earth, disconnected to it. As one drew closer to the structure, it would literally descend onto the plateau until the observer was close enough that he could see that it was indeed firmly set upon the ground. The highly polished and precision placed white casing blocks and the nearby reservoirs of water channeled in from the Nile amplified the effect. Pilgrims and visitors were always amazed to discover that the mountain they witnessed from such great distances was actually covered in innumerous smooth white stones, seemingly appearing as if they were one gigantic rock. From even up close, the Great Pyramid once looked like it was all hewn from a single immense white stone. 4. Before the Diluvian catastrophe that ended the ancient world, the geographical area of what was to become Egypt was the center of knowledge, learning, and Sethite civilization in the world. Knowledge, learning, and Sethite civilization. In a unique parallel, after the flood, this region again became the center of knowledge, shrouded in the most arcane mysteries. The Sethites encoded divine secrets into the architectural alignments inside and outside the Great Pyramid, the lesser structures, the Sphinx, and huge temples. They inscribed myriads of texts upon its surface and also concealed an ancient library of important writings below the Giza plateau. Though the Egyptian people had been conquered by Amalekites, by Hittites, Amorites, Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamites, all through their history, the Nile civilization was still venerated for having cultural centers of learning in their various temple cities that had no parallels in the rest of the Near East and Mediterranean worlds. This status remained true even until the Macedonian occupation of Greece, Asia Minor, the entire Eastern Mediterranean, Persia, and Egypt. Egypt, as a center of learning, flourished under the Ptolemies, also Macedonian, and after Alexander the Great became king of Greece. Tyre, Babylon, Persia, and Egypt, the city of Alexandria, was constructed on the Mediterranean and made famous for its incredible library that housed over 500,000 texts and records. Alexandria became a cosmopolitan admixture of Egyptian, Ionian Greeks, Romans, Syrians, Carthaginians, Persians, Jews, people from India, and even Romanized or Grecanized Celts and Gauls. Strabo studied there among the halls of 750,000 texts, all very meticulously numbered and cataloged according to Manly P. Hall in his thought-provoking Wisdom of the Knowing Ones. 5. Many of the writings preserved in the halls of Alexandria were actually old cosmographies and writings copied from copies, translations of translations that find their ultimate origin as tiny inscriptions once adorning the lower casing stones of the Great Pyramid. An entire archive later in this book has been devoted to show this. These writings were translated and copied during the life of Abraham, holy scriptures and books of wisdom and prophecy preserved by various cultures and known today as the religious writings of dozens of archaic cultures around the world. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, a Greek by birth, 4th century AD, wrote about the Great Pyramid, claiming that its builders knew of a great flood coming on the world, so they dug out deep fissures to preserve the memory of their ceremonial knowledge. 6. His statement was not novel, but the general consensus of all Alexandrian scribes who had access to histories and chronologies of the world no longer extant. It was at Alexandria where scholars produced, through patient labor, the famous Septuagint translation of the Book of Moses in the 3rd century BC. These was the books Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. By the 2nd century AD, they had completed a translation of the entire Old Testament into Greek. Later, the Romans destroyed much of the library, but Mark Antony, famed lover of Queen Cleopatra, built the library of Pergamene at Alexandria afterwards, which held over 200,000 texts. 7. Many since then are responsible for the library's ultimate demise, from invasions of Romans, Visigoths, Christian religious purgings and fanaticism, and even Muslim occupation of the city. During these tumultuous times, many of the texts were secreted away by land and sea to reappear in hundreds or thousands of personal caches and smaller libraries in Europe, Asia, and Arabia. The scholars of the Arabians that filtered into Egypt to study the pyramids and their later counterparts also left us records of their findings that verify the observances made by the older Greek and Roman writers. The Mazudi left us the Coptic traditions of Surid, Enoch, studied earlier concerning the building of the pyramids. However, this scholar also conducted his own research of the Giza site. Masudi's manuscript is preserved in the British Museum as document 9575, which tells that the faces of the Great Pyramid were inscribed with unknown and unintelligible writings of people and nations of forgotten antiquity, a fact corroborated by the writings of Ibn Huqal. 8. Another Arab historian, whose name has been lost to us, recorded that the surfaces of the two gigantic pyramids at Giza were covered in inscriptions from top to bottom, and that the lines of text were very close together but nearly erased with time. He claimed that the meanings of the writings upon the casing stones was not known. 9. Such an admission conveys that the inscriptions were very old because the Arab scholars at this time were among the world's intelligentsia, versed in Aramaic, Coptic, Hebrew, Latin, Syrian, Greek, and some even studied ancient cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Being unable to translate a script is one thing, but not being capable of even identifying the writings is quite another, a fact indicating that the inscriptions upon the Great Pyramid were of one of the truly ancient languages, probably Sumerian. As will be seen in this book, there is a considerable amount of evidence that the Great Pyramid was indeed covered in Sumerian pictographs, which were translated after the flood in the days of the patriarch of biblical fame called Abraham. Tiny inscriptions grouped in lines close together over all four faces of the Great Pyramid, possibly over the surfaces of the other pyramid as well, would be the most extensive ancient library in the world, the largest book on earth. Had these writings been in any known post-Diluvian language, then there would have been many accounts of their contents. Even the Arab chronicler Makrizi wrote that it was not known who built these monuments, and he wrote that everything connected to them was mysterious. The traditions respecting them were various and contradictory. 10. These are the records of respectable historians regarding the writings of Giza. These men saw these monuments as they were intended to be seen, and they are to be envied for this privilege. What we behold at Giza today is not comparable to the awe-inspiring majesty of the site they had witnessed. Later historians tell us why. Okay. Page 77, Beneath the Casing Stones. The great Arabian scholars that have contributed so much to the preservation of many records concerning the Great Pyramid are not to blame for the desecration of this most sacred site. It was their Muslim contemporaries who are to blame for the reason these gigantic pyramids appear naked today. It was because of their hunger for newer building materials that no human for the past 6.5 centuries has laid eyes upon the monument as it was supposed to be seen. Today, only a bare complex remains, bereft of the glorious mantle of highly polished white limestone casing blocks, covered in minute writings that dazzled the ancient pilgrims who journeyed to see it and confounded the learned. In the year 1356 AD, a devastating earthquake toppled many of the buildings in the Muslim city of Cairo near Giza. Muslim engineers had the local populace strip off the immense white limestone blocks from off of the Great Pyramids and then haul them a few miles to Cairo to rebuild the wasted city. The stone was redressed and cut, and even today, as late as 2015 AD, some of the white mosques still stand, made from the stolen stone of the world's most ancient sacred site. It took the Muslims several decades to remove all of the stone-facing blocks, and the work left behind hills of broken rocks all around the monuments. The surface area of the pyramids faces covered 22 acres, and the blocks, 144,000 in number, were 100 inches thick. 11. I got dogs barking in the background. Almost 200 years later, the Turks were stripping the casing blocks left behind, also after an earthquake that had occurred in 1517. 12. So completely had these people defaced these monuments that debates centuries later raged among the world's scholars and historians over the existence of these casing stones. The pyramids were laid bare, stripped, and their magnificent covering being removed exposed their internal structure to all levels and levels of darker limestone blocks, though the Egyptian hieroglyphic determinative seems to indicate the presence of tiny writings towards the base of the Great Pyramid. 13. For over 3 centuries, not a single white limestone casing block had been found at the Giza site. This hieroglyphic picture reveals that the pyramid had either a capstone or was intended to have one. The Great Pyramid does not have one. The 52-degree angle of the monument and the smoothness of the casing blocks would have prevented anyone long ago from climbing its faces. Because the inscriptions were very small and the lines packed closely together, it is probable that the early Egyptians did not know that these writings ascended to the very top, just as there is also a good chance that they only recovered the lower third of the structure's face. The Arabs and Turks left the base of the pyramids buried in the rock rubble from their decades-long extraction of the casing blocks, enormous piles of stone refuse, and it was not until 1837 that any serious archaeological excavation was conducted there. At that time, the British Colonel Vyse and his crews cleared away the piles of rubble and looked upon the foundation level of the Great Pyramid for the first time in over 480 years. They ended the debate, for miraculously, Colonel Vyse not only found the Great Pyramid's original base level, but also discovered original casing blocks in situ still attached to the structure. The white limestone casing blocks had been buried under the rubble. The rediscovery in 1837 validates the ancient historians' testimonies. These few blocks were weathered badly and damaged by their burial, but their smooth faces and geometrical perfection demonstrate the unbelievable level of sophistication required to manufacture just one of them. 14. At this point, one would naturally ask, and rightfully, if there were any inscriptions found upon the few remaining blocks. The answer is no. The casing blocks discovered were at the very base of the monument adjoined to the actual limestone plateau. It is not known if the writings were ever on these blocks. However, assuming that inscriptions were present at one time, we must also consider that these lowest blocks would have had the most exposure from millennia of sandblasting. They were within human reach, were under the immense pressure of the rising and moving floodwaters of the deluge and the runoffs that occurred for years afterward, the flooding of the Nile and the Delta, and the touching and kissing of the stones by millions of pilgrims that visited the holy site, similar to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. It is quite possible that over 1 billion people in the last 4,000 years alone have touched the lower blocks. Many others copied the inscriptions they found upon the surfaces, and still others had written their own names and dates on the stone. We cannot ignore that the early Greeks and Arabs wrote that these writings were in their day still perceptible, albeit almost erased with time. These writings were not engraved because the casing blocks, by all accounts, were as smooth as still water. These writings were perhaps burned by some unknown technique or painted. According to Tony Bushby, as related in his well-researched work, The Secret in the Bible, samples taken from these surviving white limestone casing blocks were sent to the prestigious Narbonne University in France, and careful analysis by chemical and spectrographic examination of the fragments determined that there was a film of paint once present on their surfaces. We have to surmise that the painting used was as sophisticated as the monument itself. These casing blocks were massive, about 100 inches thick and weighing several tons. William Corliss in Ancient Structures wrote that they were of complex shape, smoothly finished, and formally held in a very thin layer of cement of great strength and unknown formula. Even the scrutiny of modern science cannot decipher the mysteries of this monument. We are not much further in comprehending these megaliths as was Herodotus 24 centuries ago. In Herodotus's internationally famous book, The Histories, we read that he was told by Egyptians that the structures were built in 3 monthly shifts of 100,000 men each, and that it took 10 years of oppressive slave labor to build the track along which the blocks would be hauled. He was told of underground sepulchral chambers under the plateau, that the pyramid that took 20 years to build and was covered in polished stone blocks beautifully fitted. He was shown inscriptions on the structure and was told by the Egyptians that the writings explained the amount of funds expended in feeding the men that constructed the complex. The entire episode is doubtful. Even Herodotus expressed his doubt in the story. He wrote, "And I remember distinctly that the interpreter who read me the inscriptions said the sum of 1,600 talents of silver. If this is true, how much must have been spent in addition on bread and clothing for the laborers' duration all those years the building was going on, not to mention the time it took to quarry and haul the stone and to construct the underground chamber. Mathematicians have estimated that there were 144,000 casing blocks on the Great Pyramid alone. They were several tons each and similar to marble in hardness, though limestone. 15. Though divine, celestial, and terrestrial histories and secrets have been written upon the outside of these enormous casing blocks, as well as prophetic destinies and angelic mysteries, it is beneath these outer blocks where we discover additional mysteries that even in this technological world today's sages have yet to penetrate and unravel. One of these enigmas is why and how the Great Pyramid came to be constructed of 2.5 million blocks, all weighing from 2.5 tons to 70 tons, with the heaviest elevated hundreds of feet high in the structure, which stood to an amazing 203 levels of blocks at 481 feet high. High in the structure is the King's Chamber, roofed with 70-ton megaliths. Buildings today are made from human-manufactured bricks by the use of machines. Because of the ease by which bricks are produced, we take for granted the extreme difficulty in making them. People today do not grasp the Herculean effort expended in the construction of the Great Pyramid. By today's modern standards, the blocks of the Great Pyramid are gigantic compared to bricks used in our structures. Additionally, these huge blocks are carved from living stone. Not a single block was man-made, such as clay burned in a mold within a kiln. We burn clay and other materials to make bricks, and this method is ancient. Most of the standing structures around the world today, old and new, are constructed of bricks manufactured by men, even as early as the ziggurat pyramid temples of Babylonia. Concerning the superiority of stone quarry blocks as opposed to mud brick structures, Herodotus relates a curious story of the Egyptian king who had a pyramid built to commemorate his own reign, a building constructed of kiln-fired bricks, and on it cut an inscription in stone to the following effect: "Do not compare me to my disadvantage with the stone pyramids." There are stone cities around the world in remote areas of the Yucatan, Central America, and the Andes Mountains of South America, in Mexico, along the equatorial belt through China, India, the Near East, and about the Mediterranean. These truly archaic and mysterious cities provided foundations for later cultures that used the sites and built over them. These older cities are unique in that they employed stone blocks and Cyclopean building methods, stacking cut stones of such size and weight that modern engineers are at a loss to explain how they accomplish these amazing feats. The common denominator between the places of great antiquity is the disturbing fact that they all appear to have been abandoned abruptly, having suffered catastrophic damage. No megalithic city has remained standing. all have fallen and were reclaimed by the earth and excavated by men. Some even restored somewhat, but none maintained their original majesty. Only the Great Pyramids can boast this. The quarrying of millions of blocks weighing tons with a precision that only a laser could obtain, their stacking without damage, cracking fissures, the transport of this seemingly countless multitude of blocks from the quarry site, their elevation as the courses were built upward, the setting of each block into place, and then cementing them all together into one stone with an adhesive 1/50th of an inch thick, is impossible today. It has been tried by various architects and engineers, and the feat, even at 1/3 the scale, was a disaster. The most baffling aspect of these blocks is the fact that the builders of the Great Pyramid employed a, what is that, 1/100th of an inch, tenth of an inch, thousandths of an inch, something, 0.010 inch precision of the planes of the casing blocks, when a quarter-inch plane would have been sufficient tolerance as it is in modern brickwork. According to William Corliss on page 181 of the Ancient Structures, this is evidence that the builders of the Great Pyramid strove for perfection. 2,000 years ago, Pliny the Elder in Natural History, under Mining and Minerals 81, remarked that concerning the Great Pyramid, no trace of the method of building these pyramids remains, and also, the most significant problem is how the blocks are raised to such a great height. Many archaeologists have remarked that not even razor blades can fit between the blocks. The ultra-strong and gossamer thin cement was applied to every stone along all of their faces so that 2.5 million blocks became one stone. 48 centuries has not weakened the binding between these blocks. Bonnie Gaunt, in Magnificent Numbers of the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge, wrote that this cement can scarcely be seen with the naked eye, and that the stones themselves will shatter before the mortar will yield 16. Gaunt is a researcher into the meticulous numbers and numerology of the scriptures, the gematria of biblical passages, and their relevance to the Great Pyramid. It was her discovery that this incredible monument actually identifies itself as the building of God, for the Hebrew numerical value of He created is exactly 203, which we now know is the exact number of levels of blocks that make up the Great Pyramid, 17. In fact, the level of blocks, courses of masonry form an astonishing calendar of the last days, but readers will have to see this author's other works, Anunnaki Homeworld, and especially Chronotexture. Texture. Though we mourn the loss of the wonderful white mantle once adorning the Great Pyramid, this loss has turned into a blessing. The white limestone casing blocks had formerly concealed the inner shell of the pyramid's core masonry and hid the monument's only entrance from prying eyes. The removal of the casing stones has revealed to us fundamental characteristics about the Great Pyramid that distinguishes it from all other known pyramidal monuments. But the greatest mystery of all is that the casing blocks were even applied. These were often 16 to 20 tons, 100 inches thick, and none of them would have fit together so perfectly had any interior blocks been misaligned. With a structure the immensity of the Great Pyramid, there are supposed to be noticeable defects, 2.5 million blocks. This means that the core masonry, the pyramid itself, had to be perfect before the exterior facing was applied. Anyone not baffled by this has never stood before the Great Pyramid. This had to have been affected by an engineering science now lost to the world that perished with the deluge, perhaps a method of softening limestone to perfect its planes and dimensions. Assuming that 25 men, all weighing 200 pounds, all used their own body weight as leverage, these men could only deadlift one block. This does not consider the movement of these blocks, only a vertical lift. The size of the structure is only a part of its uniqueness. All right, page 83, Enormity of the Great Pyramid. The immense girth and height of the Great Pyramid could not be adequately realized without comparisons with modern structures and areas. It is the height of a modern 40-story building, yet it is so massive that it covers a 13-acre area. Or, on another scale, it covers an area equal to 7 downtown New York City blocks, 18. The vast monument is heavier than the world's 10 tallest buildings combined, and according to Nile Valley contributions to civilization, we can build 30 Empire State Buildings from the stone of the Great Pyramid, 19. Throughout the millennia of human memory in Egypt, Babylonia, Syria, Persia, the rest of the Near and Far East, up to the more modern civilizations of Byzantium, then Constantinople, and now in Istanbul, to the European nations, Great Britain and the United States, up to 1884 AD. The Great Pyramid was the tallest stone structure ever built on the planet. In 1884, the Washington Monument was raised, which stands 555 feet, 6,660 inches, but this is not a fair comparison because the monument is an obelisk, not having the internal passages and chambers so peculiar to the Great Pyramid, but still atop the 555-foot monument at the apex of the Egyptian obelisk is none other than a replica of the Great Pyramid. Modern buildings are constructed with the idea of containing things, be they offices, storage areas, or housing units. The Great Pyramid was no different, but the size of the chambers and small passages within the courses of masonry compared to the enormity of the structure itself reveals that the monument is virtually solid through and through. Vine Deloria in God is Red made an excellent illustration of the impossibility of building such an edifice today. Each stone block was a task in itself, but assuming it took the original builders of the Giza monuments an entire day to set in place 20 of these blocks, it would have taken 342 years to complete the Great Pyramid. And this estimate does not take into account the actual quarrying of the blocks and transportation time, hewing the rock to precise dimensions and raising them to the courses they were to be set in. Deloria calculated that if George Washington had the fledgling nation begin this project at this rate of production in 1776, then the building would be finished in 2118 AD. 21. We can more clearly understand why the ancients associated the structure to the world tree or axis mundi that linked the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. In both size and mystery, it was unparalleled. It was considered to be in the center of the world, and remarkably, by drawing lines directly east-west and north-south with the pyramid as the prime meridian, we find that the Great Pyramid is indeed in the center of the world's land masses, a fact easily ascertained by looking at a map. 22. The east-west lines draw from the 30th degree parallel latitude where the Great Pyramid rests will pass over more dry land than any other possible east-west lines, just as the north-south lines passes over more dry land than any other north-south longitudinal line. The association to the world tree and axis is made also because the four faces of the pyramid face the four cardinal directions of north-south, northeast, south, and west. The structure geometrically is a wonderful three-dimensional scale of the planet and a geodesic marker that identifies itself as being located exactly where on the world's surface it is found. So precise was its placement on the Giza plateau that the variation of the magnetic needle can be determined by it. 23. Structures built in more contemporary times at 1/100th the scale have not been this precise. The sheer size and weight of the structure, its cardinal alignments, perfect symmetry and craftsmanship, and geographical placement hint of an intelligent design far beyond the capacities of ancient and modern man. Its 52-degree surface angle maintained to such an astonishing height, enduring 48 centuries without collapse, reveals that it was intended to last, to survive whatever natural phenomena occurred, be it storms, earthquakes, or even floods. Though this enigmatic building has never been matched among all the structures erected by the kingdoms of men, there are pyramids all around the world that prove by their own existence just how incredible this monument truly is. All right, page 84, relics from the age of replication. There are over 350 pyramids around the world. There are thousands of ruinous mounds beneath jungle growth, desert sands found underwater in lakes and rivers and off of coastlines, many of which could have once been pyramids or pyramidal structures. In Egypt alone are concentrated the most of these ruinous piles of collapsed pyramids. There are between 75 to 80 of these heaps in Egypt, some of them largely intact. But there appears to be only one place where true pyramids are found at Giza. The Egyptian and deeper African pyramids were inferiorly put together, most having collapsed because their builders attempted to amass huge piles of rock refuse as filler. They piled up boulders, dirt, and rocks, and sometimes broken architecture from earlier structures into large piles that they then attempted to build on top of or cover with facing stones. This method has never served as anything other than a temporary way of erecting outwardly impressive monuments with very short structural durations. After a decade or a century of settling and subsidence, the structure then loses its shape. Weight is shifted, internal instabilities occur, and the edifice collapses. Such is the story of the ancient Nile civilization and its perplexed architects. Men sought to please their regents with visually impressive pyramidal monuments, and for a while throughout the life of the pharaoh, the ruse worked, but after the passage of time, the monuments crumbled to the obscurity we see throughout Egypt today. The Greeks were they who first called the people of the Nile Valley by the name of Egyptians. Originally, they were called the people of Kemet. When these early Africans initially found these gigantic pyramids, they thought they were the magnificent tombs housing the bodies of great kings or gods. As their own culture progressed, they attempted to replicate these colossi for their own rulers. The pyramids built by the people of Kemet and Saqqara, Abusir, Dashur, and dispersed throughout Upper and Lower Egypt and to the south in Nubia, never achieved even a fraction of the mastery in engineering that was required for the Gizan artifacts. The various construction methods employed in the now dilapidated ruins were intended to be pyramids expose for us today the fact that there never really existed any uniform method of pyramid construction by the Egyptians, and nor could there have been. With the Giza pyramids encased within 100-inch thick white limestone blocks hard as marble, the early Egyptian copyists had to guess at how these gigantic buildings were erected. Had they have been aware that the inside of the monument was built of millions of gigantic blocks of precise dimensions and phenomenal planes in 203 levels, all cemented together with adhesive 1/50th of an inch thick, then these architects might not have attempted to replicate them, or at least opted to try to copy them more accurately than by using unstable rubble or the more temporal mud bricks. The fact that rubble was used as filler also demonstrates that the ancient Egyptians did not originally have any knowledge of the Great Pyramid's internal passage and chamber system. So difficult was the replication process that many pyramids in Egypt were never finished, some having collapsed during construction or were laid so incorrectly that their builders became too exasperated to complete the work. The Egyptian pyramids are from 1,000 to 1,500 years younger than the Giza pyramids, and they are crumbled, collapsed, sinking from unequal weight distribution, and are overall visually unremarkable, whereas the Great Pyramid complex is still intact even after having its casing blocks purposely removed. Even though the internal structure has undergone stress fissuring from subsidence of upper levels, the unimaginable weight of the mass has not sunk an inch in 48 centuries. The greatest architectural achievements of the ancient Egyptians were the temple complexes and palaces of Saqqara, Abusir, Dashur, and Memphis in Lower Egypt near the Great Pyramid complex around the Delta, Armana between Lower and Upper Egypt, and those of Luxor, Karnak at the metropolis of Waset, which is more popularly known by its Greek name of Thebes, and Dendra, Edfu, Nakada, and Abydos in Upper Egypt. Also, we must include the Valley of the Kings and the enormous canal works along the Nile. The Egyptians can be credited with these as important and artistic achievements of their culture. However, these are no more impressive than the magnificent ruins of Knossos, Crete, the Lion's Gate fortress of Mycenae, the majestic walls, palaces, temples, ziggurat pyramids of Babylon, at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, what historians call Mohenjo-Daro of the old Harappan civilization bordering India and Pakistan, the ruins of Sumner, Baalbek, and Lebanon, and over in the Americas we find the equally impressive ruins of Cusco, Tiahuanaco, Palenque, Teotihuacan, Chichen Itza, and Tenochtitlan. I can't say that word. Tenochtitlan. Truthfully, some of the Egyptian piles of architecture are an embarrassment compared to the relics left behind in Asia Minor, the Aegean, and Europe. The temples, canals, and palaces of the Egyptians were awesome edifices because they were original designs and projects, not attempts to replicate pre-existing structures. Many of their pyramids were mud brick buildings and not made of quarried stone. Stone carved out of living rock has a longevity that mud brick constructions cannot equal. This is especially true when using mud brick as filler. The step pyramids of Saqqara and the 12th dynasty pyramid of Amenemhet I are a testament to early Egypt's lack of knowledge in pyramid construction concerning the use and benefits of living rock. Amenemhet I even had his pyramid filled with rubble from old kingdom buildings. In fact, unlike as with so many other feats of Egyptian engineering, not one architectural tablet or writing has ever been discovered depicting how pyramids were built. 24. When one thinks of Egypt today, the image of pyramids automatically comes to mind. However, the Egyptian pyramids outside of the Giza complex are not only inferior to these, they are not even comparable to those found on the other side of the world. There are pyramids on other continents of much more elaborate design and enduring construction in the Americas, monuments to provide us convincing and cognate evidence that their builders not only retained an intimate knowledge of pyramid construction methods, but they were also familiar with the idea embodied in the pyramid's origin and purpose. In North and South America are scores of magnificent and wholly preserved pyramids that have received very little attention by serious historians of the more classical civilizations. These buildings were made of living rock. Because of this, they have survived millennia, even though the cityscapes around them have not. These areas have been covered by dense jungles and forests. The more famous of these pyramid sites in the Western Hemisphere are Machu Picchu and Tiahuanaco in South America, Kolahulu, Teotihuacan, and Tenochtitlan in Mexico, and those of the Yucatec region in Central America, like Chichen Itza, and even a partially ancient pyramid at the Olmec site, 25, and those of the North American Valley between Ohio and Mississippi. Except for the pyramids at Giza, there are pyramids in the Americas far larger than any of those erected by the Egyptians. Also, there are pyramids in the Americas in the most unusual places. High in the Andes Mountains of Bolivia is a ruinous city largely carved out of a mountain called Tiahuanaco. No one knows who built the city, but archaeologists and geologists affirm that it was once a port city and had been thrust into the sky 12,000 feet elevation since its construction. Breathing at times can be an onerous task, and the region is infertile due to the high altitude climate. When the Spanish explorers and conquistadors explored the unusually preserved ruins, they were told by the Inca that the city was already present when their ancestors migrated to these lands. 26. Incredibly, even at this isolated locale, stands in Tiahanaku, an old pyramid called Lucaramata. All right. The famous city of the Aztecs outside Mexico City, called Tenochtitlan, is actually a city built many times over. The Aztecs took up residence in it long after they claimed that the Toltecs before them had lived there. They regarded these Toltecs as gigantic men who were very intelligent and knew all the secrets of astronomy and earth sciences. The extensive ruins boast many intriguing pyramidal structures and temples, but the real mystery is in why these people called the city Tenochtitlan. This word is a compound epithet conjoining to send a messenger, Titlan, 27, and Tenoch. The latter is also a conjoined term meaning the man, Enoch. The title of Tenochtitlan carries with it the ideas as place of the messenger Enoch. Though this was not the original name of the unknown city, it was precisely what the Aztecs called it. This could have only been as a result of the careful preservation of ancestral memories and their correspondence to pyramids, which were found in Tenochtitlan. The Aztec glyph for Tenoch was a 7-pointed cactus emerging from a stone. 28. The cactus is the Native American symbol for the pillar, and interestingly, it is the desert equivalent to a tree. The cactus was a suitable symbol linking the idea of a deity, in this case of Tenoch, having the power of life and death with the icon of the pillar. Also found in the ruins of Tenochtitlan was a 135-foot high pyramid with 2 temple structures at its summit that architecturally identify the twin pillar concept, linking it to the Great Pyramids of Giza. This is the Great Temple of Tenochtitlan, and discovered within it was the stone effigy of Ohetotl, the old fire god. 29. The connection to fire is almost as amazing as the eye motif upon the effigy, so consistent with pyramid findings all around the world. The greatest of all pyramids in the Americas in sheer mass are found in the ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico, where the pyramids of the sun and moon dwarf the surrounding structures. This is an extensive plain full of ruins, but its history is obscure, so old that the Spanish conquistadors found the city already buried, and the pyramids appeared as hills covered in shrubs and trees. The Aztecs considered the site holy and refused to disturb it. To them, it was regarded as the birthplace of the gods, and they had no recollection as to who built it or when it was destroyed. 30. On the entire face of the earth, there is not another ancient architectural site that so closely parallels the Giza complex in Egypt. This site is on the opposite side of the world from Egypt, but it was built with the specific purpose of mirroring architectural traits of the 3 Great Pyramids. At Giza, there is an optical illusion that has caused much confusion from those not in the know. The specialist literature always refers to the Great Pyramid, but all those who have seen it in books, pictures, video, or visually from a distance see 2 Great Pyramids. This is a clever optical illusion, causing the beholder to believe both of these pyramids are identical when they are not. There is only one Great Pyramid, and it stands 203 courses high upon the plateau, but the one next to it, thought to be its twin, is actually elevated on an artificial platform foundation that makes it look bigger than it actually is. In the ancient Mexican counterpart, we find this exact reduplication. The Pyramid of the Sun is gigantic, but instead of it being 203 levels of blocks, it is 203 feet high and filled with smaller bricks and rubble. Though it is much larger than the Pyramid of the Moon, the latter is upon a raised platform to make it appear equal with the former, 31. Such a coincidence can only be traced back to some arcane and forgotten tradition mankind shared thousands of years ago, or perhaps the builders of this stone city complex in America had actually visited Giza sometime in the dim obscurity of Earth's past. Though this is an interesting idea, there is another possibility to consider. It will be recalled that the historian Flavius Josephus specifically mentioned that there were two areas constructed before the flood by the Sethites because they feared that one site might get destroyed by the flood. Though this association seems purely conjectural, we must recall that where was it? Conjectural, we must recall that the site was initially buried. Also discovered at Teotihuacan was an intricate mural of a dragon serpent lording over two trees with 7 branches. 32. These no doubt symbolize the primordial tree of life and tree of knowledge. Again, once the prominent eye motif. This serpent dragon has a protruding tongue which denotes the power of speech. A talking serpent among two divine trees with 7 branches below an accentuated eye symbol bespeaks of a closer ancestral ties with the ancient Near East than most scholars will readily admit. Probably the greatest artifact out of the Americas relative to our study is that gigantic stone disk known as the Aztec calendar stone, or stone of the 5th sun. This mysterious 24-ton relic is an archaic Mexican apocalypse or Book of Revelation hewn out of rock. Comets, floods, disasters, fires, and calendrical motifs all encircle the epicenter, which depicts a face with a sword protruding from his mouth, just as the Revelation text reads that, "And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations." 33. We should not be surprised to find that the stylized symbol for doomsday on the calendar stone looks like a triangle. 34. These ideas did not derive from the Spanish, but were already existing in the New World before the Western European nations began their exploration and colonizing campaigns. The Americas are not without their poorly made pyramids as well. In Mexico stands the Cololú Pyramid at 215 feet high, but it has a mass covering 45 acres. Except in height, it is bigger than the Great Pyramid in Egypt, but it is inferior, a heap of earth and rubble covered in bricks, not solid masonry. The pyramids in the Ohio-Mississippi Valley are not true pyramids either, more like gigantic mounds of earth and debris where vast remains of a strange character have been unearthed. 35. The American pyramids seem to be older than their Egyptian counterparts. Some even had limestone facing, as did the Gizan structures. In some areas, it has been found that pyramids were built over older pyramids, which were in turn built upon the foundations of even older structures. In Volume 1 of Lord Macartney's Travels, we read that in both Americas, it is a matter of inquiry what was the intention of the natives when they raised so many artificial pyramidal hills, several of which appear to have served neither as tombs nor watchtowers nor the base of temples. 36. This is an interesting comment, and one of the Egyptologists have avoided like the plague, not wanting to compromise the sanctity of the ridiculous pyramid tomb theory. Most of the American pyramids are astronomically aligned with associations with the planet Venus and 4 cardinal directions. Both the early Near Eastern cultures and the ancient and more contemporary Americas venerated Venus and carefully recorded its movements through the heavens. The pyramids throughout America are in common with those Egyptian ones outside of the Giza complex in that they did not have interior upper ascended passages and chambers within their construction, and as does the Great Pyramid. Many have entrances that descend under the pyramids into chambers, natural rock recesses, well, or cisterns. The Great Pyramid was long ago known to have an entrance, and it was known that the descending passage went down to a well pit beneath the pyramid. Civilizations around the world that erected pyramidal structures copied this concept, but remarkably, no one built pyramids with ascending passages and upper chambers, which makes the Great Pyramid a unique pyramid among the many. It was about 12 centuries ago that modern men first learned that the Great Pyramid had these unusual features, long after the Egyptians ceased erecting their own versions and to isolate it away from the American cultures, which were still building. This is conclusive evidence that the Great Pyramid was the original and one of a kind. Such is the principal tenet of Freemasonry, that the Great Pyramid is the archetype, the original, and all other pyramids are merely subsequent constructions. 37. It was the first of pyramids, and at the rate by which the others are deteriorating, it will be the last as well, the alpha and omega of pyramids. The fact that the entrance of the Great Pyramid remained hidden for thousands of years does not imply that it remained hidden from human memory. All right, page 92, Secret Door to Giza. In the Coptic traditions preserved by the Arab historian Masudi, we learn that the pyramids of Giza had a secret entrance, and these accounts give precise measurements in cubits as to the location of this hidden door. 38. This door was designed to yield with the slightest pull, having been ingeniously counterbalanced. But even the force of the flood and hundreds of thousands of tons of pressure could not open it by force. One of the ancient Egyptian mystery cults highly venerated Amenta, or the hidden underworld, which was associated to the hidden one named Amen, a primordial deity that is mentioned in the older writings of the Book of the Dead. This priestly sect closely guarded the secret of the hidden entrance into the Great Pyramid, called the Door of Stone. 39. Over 100 years ago, the historian of Egyptian antiquities, Gerald Massey, wrote in his monumental work, Ancient Egypt, Light of the World, the entrance to the Great Pyramid was covered by means of a movable flagstone that turned on a pivot that none but the initiate could detect. This, when tilted up, revealed a passage 4 feet in breadth and 3.5 feet in height into the interior of the building. This was the mode of entrance applied to Amenta as the blind doorway that was represented by the secret porthole and movable stone of later legends. The means of entrance through what appeared to be a blank wall was by knowing the secret of the nicely adjusted stone. 40. The initiates and sages of the Egyptian mysteries truly believed that the Great Pyramid contained a secret entrance to the underworld. All around the world, from cultures of great antiquity and diversity, it appears that the universal motif was that there was indeed an entrance to the world below our own, a world of the blessed and righteous dead, and a portal that led into it. However, in this case, it is intriguing to find that the Egyptians believed that this entrance was at the Great Pyramid in Giza. A rationally thinking Egyptian would not have placed such a doorway into another world in any monument that he knew was made by his own countrymen. He would assume that this mystic locale would have been in a sacred place that was older than that of his people in culture as well as their monuments. And this is exactly what we find the world over concerning the cultures that migrated to newer lands to discover stone cities and huge pyramidal structures still intact amongst devastated ruins. These structures were immediately associated to the underworld, and in its gates, the oldest civilizations on this planet had in common a core belief of the erection of a world pillar, which served as the epicenter of creation that connected the three worlds, heaven and earth, and the underworld. All of the pyramidal buildings in the Americas have attendant legends and lore passed down from the indigenous Native Americans concerning their links to the other worlds through these structures. But the greatest link yet discovered is not quite a tale. It is an old petroglyph. In North America, a Hopi petroglyph has been discovered that conveys an astonishing belief, one so old it is unremembered by even by the Hopi who still protect it. It concerns an arcane theology involving the ascent to heaven and the likening of this ascent of the image of the pyramid or artificial mountain with a secret entrance, an entrance only accessible through a god. A picture of this petroglyph is found in the book entitled The Book of the Hopi. Modern archaeologists and historians sometimes have a very warped way of reasoning in view of the world around us when comparing it to that of the ancients. One example of this is the fact that scholars measure the cultures of old America by the standards of Western histories and that of the development of the Near East. Hold on. Totally forgot to take my hat off. Been working. They assume, for instance, that because a people may have been nomadic, pastoral, or in a primitive condition, that this people's mode of communication would have been primitive as well. We are learning today that this is not the case. The ability of the peoples to become civilized and to learn how to communicate using a script language based off of verbal components, does not in any way exhibit the culture's superiority concerning communication ability. In fact, the script writings we use today are inferior to the ancient pictographic modes of communication utilized by the ancients, beginning with the Sumerians. We think in pictures, and it's fair to assume that we would be better off writing using these same pictures. As a culture, the Hopi are extinct. Those still claiming Hopi are the descendants of those who were once a populous civilization. These were a people who still communicated in the oldest form known to man by pictures. The Hopi petroglyph seen here belonged to the Deep Well clan, who claimed that the black square seen within the pyramid petroglyph signified that there was a secret crypt inside the pyramid. 41. There is no known historical evidence that the Hopi had even built a pyramid or lived in any region of the Americas where pyramids had been erected. This memory must be ascribed to an elder tradition beyond their ability to recall. Preserving these pictures in the form of petroglyphs has greatly contributed to the longevity of these traditions. Of immense significance is that this particular petroglyph was preserved by the Deep Well clan. This identifies the third link to Giza. First is the pyramid motif itself. Second is the fact that it contains a secret chamber or a vault associated to a crypt. Third is the preservation by the Deep Well clan, which infers that they also remembered, or were supposed to, that underneath the pyramid was a well of uncertain depth at Giza. The Hopi interpretation of the secret crypt may be true, referring to an as yet undiscovered burial crypt somewhere inside the gigantic edifice. The old Hebraic traditions claim that both Adam and Seth were buried inside the pyramid complex, Seth having died in the 52nd year of the construction of the Great Pyramid. The secret vault may refer to the previously undiscovered ascendant passages that lead up to the Grand Gallery, and that area is now called the Queen's and the King's Chamber. The mysterious King's Chamber contained a granite sarcophagus, though it is known that it never contained a burial. While these are possible alternatives, they are not probable as an explanation for the black square's proximity on the exterior of the pyramid attached to the facing blocks of the petroglyphic pyramid. The location of this black square is most likely the secret entrance into the Great Pyramid, which is not on the surface level of the plateau, but located high up the face of the structure, about 50 feet on the northern face. Additionally, the petroglyphic pyramid's facing blocks are discovered as if they were painted or had writing on them. The final piece of this stunning mystery in North America is the name the Hopi gave to the village where the petroglyph was preserved and guarded. It is called Wanema, or the Way Home. 42. This extinct culture faithfully preserved a divine secret committed to their trust eons ago. Their distant ancestors knew that the way home was by the ascending steps of the pyramid that contained a secret entrance that was only accessible through a deity who served as a gate or doorway into this other realm. This door and the ascending corridors of the Great Pyramid were specifically designed by the antediluvian Sethite builders by the instructions of Enoch. The door was to remain hidden until a certain designated time in the future after historical events unfolded that were prophesied to occur before the flood. These events transpired long after the deluge, though myriad traditions from the old world survive concerning this hidden door and the descendant passages that led to the well beneath the structure. It was acknowledged of the ascendant passages and chambers that remained unknown throughout the entire history of mankind until recently. All right, page 95, Mysteries of the Ascendant Corridors. Over 12 centuries ago, an Arab expedition led by the Caliph of Baghdad of Babylon named Al-Mamun traveled to Egypt and camped at the foot of the Great Pyramid. They had come for treasures rumored to be hidden within the structure. Others had attempted to tunnel into the structure and had given up. The limestone, hard as marble, was a deterrent for thousands of years from would-be treasure seekers. Abdullah al-Mamun was a unique ruler. He was a scholar and learned in the traditions of his people, the Copts, Egyptians, and Greeks. He was an intellectual and collector of accounts about the Great Pyramid. There is every possibility that this builder and innovator was in possession of many of the old writings taken from the Alexandrian library centuries before. The stories he amassed concerned the historical reference to objects hidden within the Great Pyramid and Giza complex before the flood. With a sizable force of engineers, scholars, and laborers, he set to the task of tunneling into the massive building in the desert, having promised every man a share of the discovered treasure. There is evidence that this genius never intended on finding any treasures, but was there out of a burning curiosity to learn about the Great Pyramid. More on this later. The Great Pyramid was in 820 AD just as majestic and imposing as it had been over 26 centuries earlier during the life of Abraham, a white adorned gleaming mountain that was so perfect in its geometrical dimensions and placement that it appeared as an otherworldly construction amid the golden desert sands. Under the direction of Al-Mamun, the laborers tunneled into the granite hard casing blocks, employing various techniques to compromise the integrity of the stone. They eventually penetrated the white limestone casing blocks only to find gigantic limestone internal core blocks of almost equal density. They persevered, though grudgingly. Though the men under his command with every dozen feet grew more and more bitter and distraught, believing the structure solid through and through, Al-Mamun urged them on. It was at the point of giving up that something miraculous happened. As the despairing men chiseled and hammered their way into the mountain of blocks, a sudden dull thud was heard inside the structure. Something heavy had fallen down. The news spread quickly, and Al-Mamun and his men furiously tunneled in the direction that the men supposed was the source of the sound. Though hope was renewed, Al-Mamun's position was volatile. So much labor for so long had produced nothing. The men worked in shifts, aiming for the supposed hollow, and when they finally broke through, they found themselves in a tunnel within the Great Pyramid with absolutely perfect planes that had been sealed off from human wandering and scrutiny since before the flood. Al-Mamun had discovered the Great Pyramid's ascending passage, hitherto unknown to mankind. Only by the agency of traditions was it known that upper passages and chambers existed in the Great Pyramid, but for thousands of years the Egyptians and other cultures only knew of the pyramid's descending passage. This discovery proves that the Great Pyramid is the original one and that all other pyramidal monuments around the world are merely replicas. No other pyramids in the world copied these ascendant passages and chambers in the upper reaches of the structure because no one had ever been inside this upper area of the Great Pyramid during those thousands of years when men were building their own pyramids. The Arab and Egyptian workers soon learned the source of the loud thud that had attracted their attention. The hammering had caused vibrations sufficient enough to dislodge a massive stone slab that had been concealed in the ceiling of the pyramid's descending corridor. The granite plug was disguised as a ceiling block inserted into the roof of the passage. When the Egyptians investigated the interior of the Great Pyramid and took note of the descending passage, subterranean chamber, and well pit below, they walked right under this hidden entrance without ever knowing about it and transmitting the knowledge to other pyramid building peoples. None of the pyramids throughout Egypt replicate this wonderful feature. The Arabic account holds that they tunneled up and around the granite plugs, a series of 3 of them, to open up the ascendant passage, according to D. Davidson in The Great Pyramid, Its Divine Message on page 178. It was this hidden entrance that prevented the engineers around the world from copying the totally one-of-a-kind tunnel and chamber system of the Grand Gallery, the Queen's Chamber, the Antechamber, and King's Chamber, with the several relieving chambers inside the building. The pyramid civilizations, as far as the Americas knew of the descending passage with its underground chamber and well, and they faithfully replicated these features. It is certain that had they known about the ascendant passages and chambers, then they would have copied these architectural features as well. For the world pillar, the axis mundi, or navel of the world, was central to all their most ancient cosmological traditions. The existence of these upper reaches within the Great Pyramid was a secret maintained by the Sethites that died before the deluge, a secret probably passed down through the lineage of the survivor Noah and his son Shem, patriarch of the Semitic peoples, which later fell into Abraham's possession, a direct descendant of Shem. In fact, Shem outlived Abraham and personally tutored him, a man born 100 years prior to the cataclysm, when human longevity was measured in centuries rather than decades. The incredible lifespans of the ancients is a subject of Descent of the Seven Kings. By 820 AD, even the secret location of the entrance to the Great Pyramid had become lost. It was this expedition that reclaimed it. The Arabs explored the interior of the Great Pyramid, venturing down the long subterranean passage to the chamber underneath the structure deep inside the limestone plateau, and found the well pit blocked off by debris. Remember that Herodotus, 12.5 centuries before this, wrote that the Egyptians maintained that the well was deep and that it flooded from the waters of the Nile, 43. Nothing of value was discovered in the descending passage, so they turned their attention to exploring the mysterious upper areas. The Arabian explorers now searched the areas come to be called the Grand Gallery, the Queen's Chamber, the Antechamber, and the King's Chamber. These are not the true names of these architectural places, which are lost to us, and nor did Al-Mamun's men find anything inside the Great Pyramid. Though no treasures were found, these men made the discovery of the millennium. They walked and beheld chambers no humans had seen in over 36 centuries. One of the most profound discoveries concerning the interior upper passages and chambers was not made by the Arabic engineers, but by modern researchers. Salt crystals have been found exuding from the limestone rock from the surfaces of the Queen's Chamber, access passage, and the lower half of the Grand Gallery. These have now been cleaned out, but their presence was recorded by many men who had explored the interior in the last 4 centuries. These crystals were found to have fossilized microorganisms like protozoa and plankton from the ocean. This was a significant find and one consistent with what we know about the Giza Plateau. The common thread concerning traditions about the Great Pyramid is that it was under the ocean for a period of time. In the scriptures, we learn that the world was completely underwater for a year. In this author work, Descendant of 7 Kings, it is shown that the location of the Great Pyramid complex was unknown after the deluge until 340 years after the cataclysm when a mighty earthquake rocked northern Egypt. This quake was caused by the raising of the Giza Plateau out of the southern Mediterranean Sea. That created the unusual delta. Egypt was originally called the Raised Land. The original Egyptian civilization was centered hundreds of miles south around Thebes, Waset. After the quake, the raised delta area, the Nile River runoff created in a flash of seawater, created several rivers. The Egyptians found that they were now another 108 miles further from the coast. This new Mediterranean coast is the one we know today. Several travelers, geographers, and archaeologists over the years of Giza exploration have noted the abundance of seashells lying everywhere around the Great Pyramid complex. How the salt water seeped into the Great Pyramid is a mystery, and this author will not presume to know how. For salt crystals to have appeared in abundance, then this indicates a long time immersed, and because the Queen's Chamber and the lower half of the Grand Gallery were full, then the structure would have had evaporating water for centuries. The residual crystals are evidence of this. The facts that no salt crystals have ever been found in the subterranean chamber and passage system reveals that the three granite plugs that blocked the entrance to the ascendant passage were watertight. The salt incrustation was half an inch thick on the lower Grand Gallery walls and the Queen's Chamber, according to William Corliss in Ancient Structures on page 194. He further remarks that archaeologists are hard put to explain how the limestone core blocks of the Great Pyramid retain so much dense moisture content when the limestone plateau and area around Giza is so arid. He too postulates that the pyramid was under the sea. Inside the king's chamber, the Arabs found only an empty granite box, popularly known as a sarcophagus. Nothing was found inside of it, no bones, no relics from an ancestral burial, no evidence of anything, nor anything even remotely Egyptian, though this is allegedly the container of some historic ruler according to the Egyptological model. This stone box was found empty, but an incredible mystery lies within. The King's Chamber is a mine of enigmas. The architecture is megalithic and imposing. Above this is the relieving chamber, composed of several vaults divided by slabs weighing 70 tons each, 44. One seeking to enter the King's Chamber must pass through the antechamber, and in doing so must bow down or kneel in order to pass underneath the granite leaf. Only by this act can one walk into the majestic perfection of the King's Chamber. The Arabs under Al-Mamun found no writings here and no evidence on any treasure. But this does not infer that there are no messages conveyed within this most holy place. The very architecture itself its arrangement and geometrical alignments are patterned in divine revelations. So many astounding truths are found in the architecture of this structure and the correspondences between geometrical alignments and historical calendars and timelines that this author has provided them in chronotecture, lost science of prophecy, prophetic engineering. Only a few more obvious ones are listed herein. The only piece of furnishing in the King's Chamber is the granite sarcophagus, a massive stone box resting on a truly colossal slab of rock that serves as the floor to the King's Chamber, a massive foundation. One of the most disturbing discoveries concerning this granite coffin-sized box is the fact that it could have never been brought into the room. The doorway is too small to admit the sarcophagus. This means that the sarcophagus was lowered from above as the structure was still being built. This empty box tells a silent story about something that was supposed to be inside of it, perhaps a body, but is not. Without a lid, the box does not have the power to contain. The four corners of the sarcophagus correspond to the four corners of the chamber itself, providing us the sum of 8. The number of new beginnings. 8 stones cover each end of the chamber and 16 sides. 16 the sides. 45. The number 8 is significant in relation to the earthly time cycle known as the week. The eighth day is the first of the next series of 7, a new beginning. 8 was represented by a symbol having no beginning and no end, as the terminus defining a 7-day week and also the first day of the next 7 days that would make another week. The number 8 was the alpha and omega of numbers. Since terrestrial time is measured in sevens, days, years, 70-day or year periods, and the prophetic 7 ages of mankind, the number 8 signifies the concept of rebirth and renewal. The silent message screaming out from the architecture of the antechamber and king's chamber concerns one who was killed but is not dead, one who is accessible to the humble, one who left death behind, who heralds a new beginning to all those who ascend in their journey to seek him out. The king's chamber could more correctly be rendered the chamber of man's inheritance. It is in this chamber that another story unfolds. Yeah, I'll stop there. All right, page 100. The Great Pyramid. 1. Hidden entrance, door in the stone. 2. Al-Mamun's entrance and tunnel. 3. Ascending passage discovered by Al-Mamun. 4. Passage to Queen's Chamber. 5. Queen's Chamber, Chamber of Angelic Inheritance. 6. Grand Gallery. 7. King's Chamber, Chamber of Mankind's Inheritance. 8. Observation shafts, air shafts. 9. Descending passage, known to many ancient nations. 10. Subterranean chamber. 11. Original limestone casing blocks. 12. Current outer surface of exposed blocks. 13. Missing cornerstone. Hold on. 14. Well pit. My eyes. Drywall. Dust. Forgive me. On the southern face of the king's chamber is a small shaft like a telescopic tube cut precisely through 200 feet of stone through scores of courses of limestone blocks. The ingenuity required for this laser precision shaft defies the imagination when considering the fact that the shaft was cut into the blocks before they were laid in place and not after the courses of blocks were set. This makes these blocks especially difficult to fashion, their architects seemingly inhuman. Today, only lasers could replicate this feat. Archaeoastronomers claim that this shaft was originally designed to pinpoint the 3 belt stars of Orion, Alnitak, Saiph, and Rigel. Orion was a type of messianic figure to the ancients. The oldest rendering of the epithet is Urion, meaning drawn from the water. Orion was the coming prince, and as a constellation, it is the most brilliant in the heavens. It has become a very Damn, hold on. I go rub my eyes, I rub stuff in them. Yeah, too bad. Wait, it gives you a little more time to look at the words. Where was I? Orion was the coming prince, and as a constellation, it is the most brilliant in the heavens. It has become a very popular theory that the 3 largest pyramids at Giza, the Great Pyramids, are aligned geometrically to match the 3 belt stars of Orion's belt. Perhaps the theory is older than we think. The Arabian writer Eden ben Yahya long ago wrote that each of the Gizean monuments was consecrated to a star. 46. Opposite the shaft in the king's chamber is the one extending from the antechamber and points into the northern heavens at the ancient pole star, Alpha Draconis, or the Eye of the Dragon. Alpha Draconis is far from the zodiacal constellations, 47, and it appears to be lording over all the other stars, because it was the celestial pivot, a star that did not move as the rest of the starry host slowly revolved around it. When entering the antechamber, one must turn around looking behind them to see the shaft. Since 1859, several attempts have been made by serious researchers to demonstrate that the internal architectural measurements of the Great Pyramid are an encoded timeline of the history and future of the world. Unfortunately, not one of these men had an exact chronology to work with, and some manipulated historical dates to confirm two internal rectilinear measurements within the monuments to fit their preconceptions into their design. Others did not have exact architectural measurements so that their dates did not matter anyways. These men were driven with a passion to exhibit this phenomenon because they were inspired to know it by intuition, by the spirit, but not its particulars. For any who disbelieve that this Enochian superstructure is in fact a gigantic prophetic calendar of the world, then they must read Chronotexture Lost Science of Prophetic Engineering, which shows in multitudes of charts the awe-inspiring fact that these descending passages, subterranean chambers, well pit, ascending passage, queen chamber, grand gallery, antechamber, and king's chamber have all been accurately scientifically measured in minute detail, and that these measurements conform exactly to the rectilinear timeline we call world history. The Great Pyramid, a three-dimensional calendar of the future. But besides, we are now over 48 centuries into its prophetic chronology. We can easily see in retrospect how definitively perfect these arrangements are. By turning backward, one looks into the past. This is what one must do to see the shaft formerly hidden in the antechamber. To the ancient mindset, one looked into the past if they looked backwards. This was the chief trespass of Lot's wife when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, though they were spared as a family despite the fact that the inhabitants were left behind to die a fiery fate. She disobeyed the command to turn backward to see the cities as they were destroyed. She could not let go of the past. Her body was burned so fast as she stood in a field of salt from the Dead Sea that she mineralized, turned into an instant fossil composed of salt crystal, as organic tissue was replaced with minerals absorbed from the environment. Hebraic records found at this location among the Dead Sea Scrolls and in the Book of Enoch refer to Azazel, an evil archangel that before the flood was guilty of polluting the heavens for inducing men on earth. Die, little bastard. To see that which is behind them. This infers that the dark angel appeared to ancient men and taught them the forbidden knowledge and science that caused the ruin of former generations. This belief is traced back as far as the 3rd millennium BC among the Akkadians, preceded only by the Sumerians. The Akkadians claimed that humanity was originally blameless until tempted by the dragon of the deep, 48. Prior to this deception, the dragon was the divinely appointed keeper of time, epicenter of starry motion, and inside the dragon constellation was the eye of the dragon, the antediluvian pole star, 49. There are Hebrew traditions that link Azel to another name, Shemyaza, who was judged by Orion and eternally bound for revealing the name of God to mortal women, 50. As will be seen, these traditions are also linked to the secrets of the Great Pyramid. In the most primitive and remote cultures around the world, the dragon was noted long ago to be the appointed guardian and keeper of hidden treasures on the mountain of the gods, the mount that interchanges with the tree, 51. The dragon archaically symbolizes divine kingship, 52, and this concept is as old as Sumer and Babylonia. After the Diluvian disaster, it became a prevalent tradition which was carried all around the world. The Aztec mural excavated from Teotihuacan with the dragon with a large eye hovering over the two trees is merely one of thousands of examples of this idea spread throughout antiquity. In Genesis, we find the beginning of the dragon as a serpent that deceived mankind, a serpent that as a terrestrial king becomes a dragon with 7 heads towards the last days end of the dragon's reign. Probably the oldest recorded story of the dragon before the deluge was discovered upon tablets in the famous Assyrian library of Ashurbanipal, 53. He was also called the Twisted Serpent because of its snake-like appearance in the heavens, a string of stars forming the Draco constellation, which was even mentioned in the ancient book of Job, 54. The importance of the dragon ended with the flood because of the planetary change. Our axis pointed at Alpha Draconis prior to the deluge, but after the global catastrophe ended, the survivors noticed immediately that there was a whole new starry order and that the dragon had fallen. Now the axis had shifted and pointed at the Great Bear, Ursa Major, which was the new pole star. The flood that destroyed the world's civilizations was by no means a mere flooding of the land, it was a worldwide cataclysm. Though this book cannot cover all the details and literature concerning the tragic end time event in ancient humanity's past, here is a very concise summary of what occurred. The full accounts are in this author's works entitled When the Sun Darkens and Descent of the Seven Kings. About the same time that a large star appeared moving in the heavens with a tail that looked like a divine sword, earthquakes shook the cities of the world. For 7 days and nights, the people of the earth beheld the approaching sword and brilliant star as the foundations under their feet cracked and the animals became erratic and violent. Volcanoes erupted and pillars of fire shot high into the air and rained ash. The earth trembled unceasingly, and entire mountain ranges sprang up as new river systems appeared in days and lakes vanished or others appeared overnight. Whole cities were disintegrated and sunk below the shaking ground, while land masses were thrust upwards, while others buckled and were buried under new coastlines. It began raining and never stopped. The animals traveled in wild packs, domesticated animals maddened, attacking their masters and children. As the tail of the gigantic burning star enveloped the sky, the entire sun dimmed to a dark brown orb barely seen as flames burned across the sky, and plasma in the upper atmosphere caused a spectacular display of lightning bolts that scattered across the darkened sky in the daytime and struck the earth in thousands of places. As the passing comet or planetary fragment entered into a full transit between the sun and earth, the daytime sky blackened like night. The stars appeared in the daytime, the moon turned the color of blood, and gigantic rocks fell from the sky. One particularly whole region we know as the Gulf of Mexico became the burning impact crater. The shock wave literally took apart the entire western hemisphere. The center of Sethite civilization sank below the rising tides and was buried under 40 days of rainfall. The mighty Gihon River raging against the land once fertile covered in woods we call Egypt. The Giza Plateau bearing the Great Pyramid suffered subsidence of the entire shelf and was plunged into the depths of the sea we know as the southern Mediterranean, where it would remain at the bottom for 340 years. The violent current during this year-long inundation underwater severely damaged the Sphinx and caused deep water erosion that the pyramids encased in facing blocks did not suffer. This water erosion is the source of the erroneous theory propagated today that the Sphinx is older than the pyramids. A year later, the world was a colder place of glacial sheets miles high, covering the upper northern and southern polar regions, extending southward and northward for thousands of miles beyond the Arctic and Antarctic circles. The world was filled with mudslides, sinkholes, meltwater seas that created vast freshwater lakes. The world continued to settle as decomposing bodies of billions of life forms were compressed under millions of tons of earth. The entire buried land surfaces with broken forests and their occupants formed immense coal deposits and graveyards of pre-flood life forms, and flora were burned by pressure, decomposition, and radioactivity. The world's oil deposits were created, as were tar pits, and hollowed cavities deep under the ground have filled with natural gases like methane, as the world that once was has decayed, fossilized, and became gaseous bitumen, coal, oil, or other fossil fuel byproducts. The entire pre flood world and its once thriving civilization vanished, and the topography of the world, the whole planet, was altered. It was literally turned upside down. It was this global cataclysm that caused the Earth to tilt and move its axis away from the eye of the dragon. The approach of this object, known to the ancients as Phoenix, caused massive geomagnetic disturbances and even several reversals in rapid succession as it was in direct transit between our world and the sun. As the Earth was immersed within its parabola and shadow, the gravitational attraction and interference loosened the outer layers of our world. People in terror braced themselves as they saw the stars in the daytime. Then the earth rolled, turning over to face the night side and rolled back before Phoenix pulled away and the planet recalibrated. The equal the equatorial equatorial bulge was created in an instant from the reshaping of the Earth's dimensions, and when it was all over, the new axis pointed at the Great Bear from the dragon, for the dragon had fallen. 55. The fact that the northern shaft in the Great Pyramid points to Polaris Great Bear indicated to Gerald Massey over 120 years ago that the Great Pyramid was built to demonstrate the ending of the great year and the final overflow of the dragon. 56. Such a pole shift is found in the ancient text called the Book of Noah, dispersed among the writings of the Book of Enoch. These writings claim that before the flood, the world trembled violently and the earth became inclined and that destruction approached. 57. The flood ended the reign of the dragon, which could no longer control the destinies of mankind. The Noahic flood was not the cause, but an effect of powerful interplanetary dynamics. This other planet, not one that travels the plane of the ecliptic like the others, but seen in 1764 AD by astronomer Hoffman as it passed over a fifth of the sun's surface in a partial transit and was seen by people all over Europe with the naked eye. Hoffman noted that it traveled on a north to south trajectory passing over the ecliptic. This rogue planet on its 138-year orbit has been seen many times and is the topic of When the Sun Darkens. When Phoenix transited, it compromised the fragile mesosphere that once protected the Earth, a high-altitude water canopy that deflected harmful radioactive particles while creating a wonderful global greenhouse. This water vapor canopy, similar to that like Venus's, collapsed and fell to the Earth, causing the flood. Genesis is very clear that prior to the flood, the entire world was watered in the morning and evening by a thick mist that emerged from the ground, and that rain was unknown. The collapse of this mesosphere also caused the drastic decrease in human longevity from centuries to decades. Coupled with this was a decreased metabolic rate due to vitamin and mineral deficient foods due to the infiltration of harmful radioactive particles from the sun that the former mesosphere shielded away. Because of the reign of the dragon, the world had become inferior. It tilted like a pillar falling, and the heavens, stars, and planets withdrew from Earth visually because the water vapor canopy that had been there magnifying the heavens was now gone. The removal of the mesosphere altered human biology to the molecular level, and even now the human genome retains junk DNA from those times before the deluge when we were biologically superior beings. The Great Bear is a constellation of 7 stars revolving around the pole, or circumpolar. What is disturbing is the fact that these stars in no way conform to the shape of a bear, but the association to a bear animal was universal among the ancients. 61. These 7 stars were a symbol of initiation into the holy mysteries of the heavenly ascent of the soul. 62. As the ascent of the soul was required for resurrection, the link to the bear may be due to its hibernation trait during the winter, a type of death during the dead part of the year. The bear emerges in the spring as the cold dissipates in a type of rebirth. It was said long ago that the bear kept watch in the stellar stories. 63. However, as will be shown, the older beliefs are quite different as to the identity of these stars. Hindu legends claim that there exists a place on earth where the Lord of Time dwelt upon a transcendent mountain that had a summit that glowed like a tongue of fire at sunset, great pyramid with crystal top stone, and towards where the seven stars of the Great Bear turned their eyes, 64. In old India, they were called the seven rishis, seven powerful and ancient wise rulers in humanity's distant past that were known as the seven sons of the Dragon of Wisdom, 65. Max Mueller interprets Rishi to be derived from a root meaning to shine. Before the flood, there was a dynasty remembered by the Sumerians as the Seven Kings. These wicked rulers began their dominion after the departure of Enoch, and they were personally responsible for creating the insane conditions and corruption that led to the judgment of God that resulted with the Great Flood. This is the subject matter of Descent of the Seven Kings. The link to the bear may have been due to a phonetic corruption among the nations of antiquity, possibly spanning back as far as the Babel Holocaust. There is evidence that an initial vowel has been worn off of rishis. Originally, the word was ara, Eshas. The idea behind the star group was not that of a bear, but of the plowing of the dawn. These seven stars were identified as seven plowing oxen, 67. Phonetically, the word bear is the same as boer, or father of light. In fact, most of the elder languages had the sound of the word bear equivalent to the words for either light or fire. The Latin ursa, bear, resolves into se, fire and light. Resolves, yeah. And the Sanskrit riksha, as in rishis, expands into isha, or fire of the great Isha. Riksha means bear, 68. These seven stars represented the gate of heaven, and for this reason do we find in Egypt depictions of a ladder tipped so as to point to the seven stars of the Great Bear, 69. This faith in the divine entrance to the heavens may be why the oldest nations referred to the seven stars as the sheepfold, 70. As pastoral societies, early man envisioned the afterlife as a state of perpetual perfection where he no longer had to worry about mundane needs such as food and protection from enemies, things taken care of by the shepherd of the flock. And this is the mystery between the dragon and his enemy, the shepherd, embodied within the faces and corners of the antechamber, king's chamber, and shafts. Below the king's chamber, or chamber of man's inheritance, lies the place come to be known as the queen's chamber. No extravagant grand gallery or antechamber system leads into this largely unremarkable chamber. There are two shafts that penetrate through 260 feet of stone, but they do not point at any obvious star groups. As the king's chamber concerns the incredible destiny of humankind and their redemption, the lower chamber concerns the other sentient beings in the creation, the orders of angels known by many names like archons, deacons, principalities, cherubim, watchers, guardians, and seraphim. What was meant for angelic comprehension was not intended for human comprehension. The angels came before us, and entry into the queen's chamber does not require the traveling up through historical timelines, grand gallery, antechamber, king's chamber. The histories of the angelic orders are far more complex than the simplified explanations by theologians. Long prior to the creation of mankind, the angels were a part of an extensive civilization, multidimensional, with our own solar system being the epicenter of government. The long-held misconception of men crowned in halos with white feathery wings and white gowns is a fiction. Angels are trans-dimensional beings able to transcend our fourth-dimensional reality because they are fifth-dimensional intelligences, allowing them to move beyond both space and time. They have passions, allegiances, orders, and have the capacity to disobey them as well. The orders of the angelic hosts have taken sides in a primordial dispute between the Godhead and the first created archangel, and this led to a devastating war that destroyed planets and billions of life forms, all long before anything was ever introduced into the creation called man. Our Earth is very old with a rich history though in the span of planetary antiquities humanity is an infant. Humankind was never meant to be. The Godhead made man in his image, having an immortal soul, but his body was designed merely as a vessel. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is necessary because mankind was given over to death on earth, a scheme designed by his enemies, those angelic entities that rebelled and thought to make war against God through his signature creation. Though the angels were created in the beginning and were never initially subjected to death, being a biological phenomenon by their own choice, did they cast their lots, lose a war, and now await the very fate they had initially planned for mankind, death. Though judgment has been delayed, it has already been declared. That the sarcophagus is empty reveals that one had already sacrificed himself for his flock. There are some who would object to this analysis on the basis that the angels came first and their own chamber was underneath that designated for mankind. Yeah, the Great Pyramid is prophetic architecture and alludes to that which will be, not the state of things that are. Angelic beings indeed have deserved a status much higher than those who came later than humans on earth, and scripturally the angels are described as greater in power and might. But this was by God's design. The story of the prodigal son is about disobedient mankind going out in the world in defiance of the Father, while the other brother, angels, stayed with the Father and did everything he was supposed to. This parable was for the angels. When the defiant son returned and begged to enter his father's house, the father had a great party and feast, gave him a robe and ring, and was elated with his return. The faithful brother informed the father that he had never received these things, but the father replied that it had always been that they were together, but his brother who was lost had now returned. It is difficult for people to grasp how humans could be regarded more highly to God than his own angels, because people are unaware of the truly astonishing inheritance the redeemed shall receive in the eternal future. According to the New Testament records, while on earth we are a little lower than the angels. However, in our resurrected, glorified, and powerful bodies, we will be made in the likeness of Christ, receiving an eternal inheritance greater than that of the angels. In fact, Paul wrote that we will be put into a position to judge angels, 71. Angelic beings were the first sons of God, but some of them fell in distant antiquity, falling from their first estate and became evil terrestrial entities bent on corrupting mankind. Those among men who believe on him shall receive the spirit of adoption, also becoming sons of God. Created in his image, we receive a higher divine status, which is reflected in the internal architectural features of the Great Pyramid. What information is blind to us is evident to the angels. The air shafts of the Queen's chamber are mysterious to us, but we do not know what revelations they contain for angelic beings, luminaries that, according to the Genesis account, were created to be signs to those of us on the earth. 72. In the book of Enoch, we find this a possibility. Concerning the passing of the night sky, Enoch wrote, I bless the Lord of glory who made those great and splendid signs, stars, that they might display the magnificence of his works to angels and to the souls of men, and that these might glory in all his works and operations, might see the effects of his powers, might glorify the great labor of his hands, and bless him forever. 73. We cannot deny that the angelic mind is one of an ancient intelligence with a memory spanning many millennia, perhaps eons before the creation of Homo sapiens, and most likely with the capability of instant recall. Memory for an angelic entity would not be biologically based with the neural restrictions we possess. What information concerning their own destinies may never be known among men, but evidence that our predecessors partially knew of these secrets is found in several Enochian passages. Further, Old Hebrew traditions link angels with the Pyramid Esoterica in that they told that the number of angels that originally fell from heaven and deliberately descended to earth assuming human-like bodies was 520. And these 520 angelic beings took the daughters of men. This 520 is a duplication of the pyramid exterior angle of 52 by a factor of the pyramid number 10. These angels lusted for human females and sexual experiences and crossed a spiritual barrier that could not be breached once passed through. These angels are forever lost and continually interfere in the affairs of men, maddened with rage and fear. Judgment declared, but delayed. Mankind, as redeemed, is offered the opportunity to pass through this spiritual threshold and take up the offices of those that had disobeyed, inheriting these positions through divine adoption. Over a century ago, various scholars and translators of Near Eastern texts were of the uniform opinion that the ancients believed that humanity was specifically created to fill in the gap left behind from the defection of the innumerable angels who were banished, 74. One of these intriguing finds was the Babylonian Revolt in Heaven tablet, which reads, to those rebel gods, angels, he prohibited return. He stopped their service. He removed them unto the gods who were his enemies. In their room he created mankind. 75. Such also was the teaching of the Gnostics, who held that mankind would only replace those archons, deacons, and principalities that rebelled, becoming a part of the inheritance of the height. 76. This is none other than a reference to the Great Pyramid, the mysteries of resurrection embodied within its design. All right, page 108. The hidden one. Though the Great Pyramid is the original of these types of structures upon the face of the planet erected by an advanced civilization buried by the deluge, it is itself merely an image of what a true pyramid should be. It is a symbol representing an ideal, even when it had its beautiful white limestone garment of casing blocks with their minute writings. The monument was still incomplete. With its over 2.5 million blocks cemented together by adhesive so strong, the building is virtually one single stone of many parts. It is still only a semblance of a true pyramid and not yet finished. Just as the sarcophagus whispers to our souls that something is missing, so too does the 30 by 30 foot platform atop the Great Pyramid hint that something is not quite right. As a colossal pillar, the function of the edifice, at least structurally, was to support something of great importance to the earth and, by extension, man. But this area at the apex is as empty as the stone box in the king's chamber. Architecturally, there should be placed at the summit of the pyramid a cornerstone, but there is no evidence that such a gigantic piece was ever set in place. In fact, such a capstone would be enormous, a true pyramid, because it would be carved out of living rock from a single stone. A cornerstone cannot be a topstone if made of blocks. It would be a true and perfect altar, 31 feet high and 48 feet wide, 77, and weighing over 100 tons. We know of no other ancient megalithic structure on this planet that requires or has a stone this immense and heavy hoisted up to its 481-foot elevation. If the largest cranes in the world were to attempt to hoist this size of stone to 481 feet over the wide faces of the Great Pyramid, it would be a feat unrivaled in the history of human engineering. The existence of the Great Pyramid alludes to that which is perfect. After its erection 48 centuries ago, it was still incomplete because the structure required the placement of white limestone casing blocks to cover the monument to give it the appearance of being a single enormous pyramid. In essence, it was originally designed to appear as an illusion. Only a garment of gleaming white could beautify the body within. Without this clothing of white limestone casing blocks, the cornerstone atop it could never be set right upon the building. Even if one of the 144,000 casing blocks was off alignment, it would have rendered the entire structure at imperfect symmetry. The flawless would have been flawed, but unlike the pyramid structure itself, the cornerstone does not require casing blocks to perfect it. It is already perfect. If the placement of such a colossal prism is not possible even today, then naturally we must look deeper into the symbolism of this pillar. When we look backward to ancient Egypt, we stumble upon a profound belief concerning a large stone that fell from heaven shaped like a pyramid. When the Egyptians discovered this rock, they found it covered in writings upon its faces, arcane knowledge about the birth of the universe. It was called the Benben stone and was linked to rebirth 78. The Heliopolitan cult near Giza at Memphis maintained a mansion of the Benben, and it was held that this pillar was originally made of meteoric iron 79. To the archaic mind, meteoric iron was a heavenly metal holy to God. This stone shaped like a pillar was a spiritual geographical marker that represented the first point of creation or place of the first time, 80. Thus, the true capstone descended or will descend from the heavens and will initiate a rebirth, which brings us back to the empty sarcophagus in the king's chamber. To the Sethites, both before and after this deluge, this monument was the stone embodiment of a prophecy from the earliest times concerning the end of the world and its destruction by fire. It was the fragmented memory of this that gained it the name pyramid or pillar of fire, but this is merely the covering, the surface text to a gigantic book that has remained in plain sight for millennia. An enormous mine of revelations that beckons us to search deeper into its mysteries. We see spiritual truths like as through a glass darkly, 81, and it just may be that this silent and magnificent monument is a gate to a promise from heaven extended to all on earth who choose to see it. All right, Archive 4, page 111. Secrets of God in Egypt, what the scholars have buried in Syriad. Because the Giza complex is in Egypt, it is logical to assume that the Egyptians long ago knew more about the origin and purpose of these monuments more than any other people. Unfortunately, the most ardent enemy against new thinking and reinterpretation of the earliest records from Egypt concerning the Great Pyramid are the Egyptologists. This school of historians and scholars are bent on making all believe that Giza is a cultural relic of Egypt's past, of the Golden Age period of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaura, all early dynastic rulers known better by their Grecian names, Cheops, Chephren, and Mycerinus. To these men who have vested interest in having the world believe in the Egyptocentric origin of the Giza monuments, it is absolute blasphemy for them to even consider the possibility that the pyramids were not built to house the dead bodies of pharaohs. Over the last few decades, researchers have attacked the pyramid tomb theory. These writers are responsible for the rift between the Egyptologists and the wide readership throughout the world that holds that the pyramids could not have been built as tombs. Just as unrelenting as the Egyptian scholarship, these renegade researchers and fringe archaeologists are too obstinate to even allow for any other interpretations but their own, not considering that the purpose of the Great Pyramid could be multifaceted, with one aspect being the representation of an empty tomb, one, as revealed earlier, that was specifically designed not to hold the remains of a body. One of the battlegrounds between the two differing vantage points concerns the Valley of the Kings. It is hundreds of miles south of Giza and second to the Great Pyramid and Sphinx in popularity. The Valley of the Kings is a royal burial site riddled with tombs, crypts, secret vaults, hidden entrances, and deeply concealed subterranean complexes that were once filled with provisions for a pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. Early Egyptologists theorized that the valley became a burial site of their kings in late antiquity because it could not possibly account for all the regents of Egypt's past in order to continue their efforts to prove that Egypt was truly over 1,000 years older than the other traditional civilizations of the mid-second millennium BC. Egyptologists then had to assume that the earliest burials before the valley must have been within the pyramids. This teaching is propagated extensively when the fact there has never been excavated any royal remains from any pyramid in Egypt. Some earlier historians even attempted to place the mummified remains of long-dead commoners inside the monuments for others to discover, but these feeble attempts were never persuasive, and usually evidence was found to prove the deception. The pyramid tomb theory was simply invoked to explain away the lack of truly ancient burials at the Valley of the Kings site. The evidence taken from the valley concerning the pharaohs that were interred there suggests that Egypt is no older than Babylonia, Sumner, Mitanni, Elam, Anatolia, or other approximately 4,400-year-old civilizations. Egyptian history has largely been molded upon a foundation that lacks authority, ideas born to fill an apparent void rather than based upon truly existing facts or evidence. Anthropology and archaeology as a whole do not support an Egyptian presence beyond 2500 BC. Egypt's great age is only attested to in Egyptian mythology and records of late Grecian antiquity. No other national archives from the Old World support their claims to high antiquity. Such collaboration should have been found somewhere, perhaps in the thousands of ancient stone writings of Ashurbanipal's library, the Sumerian Library of Nippur, the Canaanite Ras Shamra Library, or archaic tablets of the Ebla Library, the Amarna documents of Egypt, or even the biblical records. Even the pyramid text and Edfu inscriptions speak of a civilization predating Egypt, curious writings that will later be detailed in this archive. Nowhere is Egypt's claim to high antiquity validated. One of the world's most undisputed authorities of Greek mythology and researcher of the world's oldest theological systems is Robert Graves, who, in his epic work entitled The White Goddess, wrote, Egyptian texts and pictorial records are notorious for their suppression and or distortion of popular beliefs. 1. This is seen clearly in that the scholars today claim that Egypt's dynasties stretch back to 3150 BC, to what they termed the early dynastic period, which lasted to about 2686 BC. The problem they confront is that the burials at the Valley of the Kings merely date back to the Middle Kingdom, ca. 2040 to 1780 BC, beginning with Tutmos I. 2. The historians had no choice but to create an old kingdom that buried their kings in pyramids, which is nothing but good old scholarly fiction based off zero evidence. As we will later see in this work, the first so-called dynasties of Egypt were actually borrowed, these records mirroring the earliest dynasties of other Near Eastern cultures. Egypt can only truly claim that it is but a part of to a whole, sharing a common origin traced back to a single elder civilization. Egypt's great age is made more dubious by some other important facts. First, there are no known liturgies revealing life beyond the grave until the end of the Old Kingdom, about 2155 BC. 3. This is not as it should be. Assuming Egypt is as old as they claim and at a highly developed state of civilization as to have erected the Gizan monuments, then liturgies should be discovered everywhere. Is this not controversial? Is this not hypocrisy to state, on the one hand, that a culture could have built a monument the size and precision of the Great Pyramid for the purpose of burying a ruler and preparing him for his afterlife journey, while also knowing, on the other hand, that there existed no writings in the ancient Egypt in ancient Egypt at that time, depicting a belief in life after death. Part of the confusion was specifically introduced by the scholars of Egyptology at a rather insignificant pyramid attributed to Unas, an early Egyptian ruler, were discovered that what have become popularly known as the pyramid text. This pyramid is at Saqqara near Giza in Lower Egypt. These pyramid texts have absolutely nothing to do with the Giza monuments, because the pyramid of Unas is far inferior to those of Giza. The historians and archaeologists automatically claim that Unas ruled before any of the Giza pyramid builders, basing their conjecture upon the premise that the pyramid building art followed an evolutionary path from small and inferior to colossal edifice of the Great Pyramids itself. What is truly curious, if not outright suspicious, is why Egyptologists do not comment on why the Great Pyramid and its adjuncts do not have inferior inscriptions or hieroglyphs. In fact, no writings have been found within the Giza complex pyramids. For the real irony is that we are told that Egypt's dynasties are based upon fact. However, it is a fact that Egypt's history was never recorded as a series of consecutive events measured out linearly as we have with the present Gregorian calendar or older Julian calendar. In Egypt, each calendar began with the reign of a new pharaoh after the death of the earlier ruler. 5. The records of the Hebrews do not support Egypt's claims either. In the Book of Jasher, writings of Jubilees, the various testaments of the patriarchs, the Torah, Midrashic, and Talmudic writings, there is no reference at all to the burying of Egyptian pharaohs and pyramids. This is a startling fact due to the historic ties these people had with Egypt, ancient Egypt. In the Testament of Simon, we learn that at his death he was put in a coffin with the bones of Joseph, which were in the tombs of the kings in Egypt. These tombs were religiously guarded by the Egyptians. 6. All of the patriarchs that died in Egypt were buried in the tombs of the kings of Egypt because Joseph was highly venerated by the Egyptians, having virtually become one of their greatest rulers, second only to Pharaoh. According to the Book of Jasher, the surviving Hebrews in Moses' time were commanded to take these bodies out of the tombs and carry them with them from Egypt to Canaan to bury them with their forefathers at the city of Hebron. This leads to a very interesting fact concerning Egypt's claims to high antiquity. Hebron was anciently called Kirjatharba in the days before the Israeli occupation of Canaan, named after a legendary patriarch of the Anakim giants who was named Arba, the father of Anak. In the book of Numbers, we learned that the Egyptian city of Zon was built 7 years after Hebron in Canaan. This statement has baffled scholars for centuries because it has nothing to do with the text. Biblical Zon has identified by Egyptologists as the city of Tanis, and this intriguing statement was most likely inserted into the text because even in those early centuries after the construction of Hebron in the days of Abraham's fathers, it was a prevalent teaching among the Egyptians that they were older than their contemporaries, and ancientness the author of Numbers sought to show was untrue. The Hebrew records clearly detail how the cities of Canaan were built first. Then Egypt was occupied by 7 nations, all kin to each other, that in the 19th century participated in a war for the Nile regions. The people of Kemet won out, successfully ousting cultures that later came to occupy Philistia, Crete, Libya, Nubia, and many areas of the Aegean. One of the oldest surviving records concerning this early conflict is found in the writings of Flavius Josephus in his notes on the Ethiopic War. Also, we find remnant traditions of this olden war in the fragmented Grecian myths. Probably the most profound enigma is how the scholars have so adamantly, without any debate or peer refutation, portrayed the Great Pyramid as being the intended tomb of a pharaoh Cheops. The actual stele of Cheops claims there was already a pyramid at the Giza site prior to his own reign. 7. Incredibly, though this is supposed to be the largest tomb in the world, historians claimed that Cheops feared that his own people would desecrate his pyramid and burial site because they were discontented with his reign, so he was secretly buried in an elaborately cut sepulchre 1,000 feet away. 8. This is a ridiculous notion, and to think it is actually passed off as serious scholarly consideration. A pyramid the size and majesty of the Great Pyramid was built by a culture that hated its ruler, and this regent was then buried in a lesser construction nearby because he feared his tomb would be desecrated and his remains forever lost before they could be granted access to the afterlife. Preposterous. A hypothesis completely built from a vague reference in Herodotus' writings that claimed that the Egyptian people so completely hated Cheops and Khephren that they will not even mention their names. One must be invested with a tremendous amount of blind faith to accept the idea that Cheops or Khephren had anything at all to do with these monuments. Despite the efforts of modern scholars, redactionist historians, and archaeologists and their united effort to bury the truth in Syriad, there stands today a quiet artifact from the ancient world from before the deluge that cannot be buried or concealed. There stands a guardian at Giza that protects over the secret purpose of the Great Pyramid. All right, page 115, Guardian of the Deep. 240 feet long and 66 feet high, carved out of living rock, the Sphinx is the largest and oldest statue from the old world, still intact. 9, over 2,000 years after the Sphinx was made, the Egyptians erected a 68-foot statue of Thebes, not to be confused with the Greek Thebes, which is now fallen and crumbled. Also, the Greeks at Olympia constructed a seated statue of Zeus, the Roman Jupiter, that stood at 68 feet in height, which likewise has not survived. 10. It is a testament to the ingenuity of pre-flood engineers that this relic, exposed to weather and catastrophic conditions for over 4 millennia, that it should remain largely intact, though statues built almost 1,000 years after the flood have long since perished. The Sphinx identifies a very old concept recorded in the book of Genesis. After mankind rebelled against the ordinances of God and ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, their eyes were opened, and they then knew that they were naked, no longer fit to reside in paradise, the walled garden. They were banished from Eden. Because the tree of life, by virtue of its fruit, could sustain them forever, they were sent out of the garden, and at the entrance was placed a guardian cherub with a flaming sword at the east of Eden to prevent them from obtaining access back to the tree of life. The cherub's duty was to protect the interests of God from defilement, for mankind had become unclean, was naked, and now because of the knowledge of sin and rebellion, man had to be clothed in a new garment before entering back into the paradise of God. The Sphinx even today faces the east towards the rising sun, which is typified in many archaic beliefs as the fiery flaming sword of antiquity before the image of these two most sacred trees, two large pyramids. The Hebrew cherubim finds their origin in the Akkadian caribou sphinxes that acted as guardians of temple entrances. 11. They were exclusively placed at the eastern entrances of palaces and temple precincts. 12. Interestingly, some Babylonian temples guarded by cherubim were called the Temple of the Great Tree. 13. In the Near East, these cherubim conveyed a twofold meaning, inferring that their presence protected inaccessible areas forbidden to sinful men, while also signifying that by passing by them and entering the temple courts that they guarded, the truths of the priesthood and its mysteries were indeed accessible. A further embellishment linking the Genesis narratives to that many temples in Old Babylonia had priestesses in the entrances that enticed passerby to enter by holding out fresh apples in exchange for temple truths, a ritual in commemoration of the mother of all living, Eve, and her taking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, a very old concept known by the Babylonians and their predecessors. Some of these priestesses were charged with having sexual relations with temple visitors and a darkly twisted theology that brought more offering to the priesthood. For when men accepted the gift of the apple from the female, he was admitted into the inner sanctuary of the premises and rewarded by carnally knowing the priestess, a practice of sacral prostitution directly linked to the belief in the Genesis narratives. This knowledge of carnal relations with the girl came with a price that was paid to the temple. The sacral prostitution is practiced early on and was a main component to the goddess religions and served to teach men that knowledge was gained through females, priestesses who in turn received divine knowledge from the gods themselves, much in the same fashion as Eve received information from the deceitful serpent. As a divine protector, the cherub sphinxes became a very popular household item. Some artisans and merchants made their living by carving and trading miniature replicas of them. In biblical writings, they are referred to as teraphim, guardian divinities of the gate, named after Terah, the father of Abraham. In Hebraic writings, like the Book of Jasher, we learn that Terah was a religious worshiper of these idols, and although he was a general at the armies of Babylonia and was a Chaldean, he was rebuked by his son Abram, who smashed all his idols. The original tradition associated with the Sphinx was that it was a watcher. These angelic beings were of an order of heavenly guardians entrusted with protecting the interests of God on earth, but some of them fell and induced mankind to worship them through their forbidden knowledge as opposed to the Creator. Arabic beliefs seem to be linked to these traditions, for the name by which they call the Sphinx was Abu el-Hol, meaning father of terror. 14. This epithet alludes to the duty of cherubim to terrify men from entering the holy places consecrated to God. The Arabic titles derives from the Egyptian word for guardian, Hu. 15. The word Sphinx is not at all an Egyptian word, but was the Grecian title given to the monument that was in itself based off of a false etymology in reference to an old story about the statue strangling a man for not being able to answer a riddle. These people thought the statue bestowed secrets of great importance to travelers in the forms of riddles, which are images of truth artistically concealed within puns, allegories, and metaphors. Hold on. My luck, I'm going to hit a button. Thus, the Greeks of later times believed the meaning of the Sphinx was throttler, when, in fact, the word actually means to bind closely together. 16. This meaning identifies the Sphinx as a watcher, for in occult writings based off of ancient traditions, the watcher guardian was to protect portals that link worlds together. 17. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead are torturous guardians of portals in the world of the dead that attempt to keep disembodied spirits from passing through into the other world. 18. Such protectors were used in Egypt's temple complexes also and were called Eker lions, which were sphinxes placed before doors and gates. The Acre statues were keepers who open and shut the gates into the worlds of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. 19. Remarkably, the ancient title of the Sphinx given by Egyptians was Acre because it was believed by them that the gigantic statues stood atop the underworld, which was also called Acre. Gerald Massey, in his Ancient Egypt Light of the World, wrote that the Sphinx protected the secret of Earth's beginnings from the abyss, the deep, and that it was carved out of the rock at the center of the earth to commemorate the sacred place of the creation. 20. Perhaps this is further alluded to in the Book of the Dead, which reads, Hail, Lord of the shrine which standeth at the middle of the earth. He is I, and I am he. Such a shrine would refer to the Great Pyramid, which the Sphinx guards. Massey also wrote that the Egyptian text called the Ritual teaches that the mystery of the Sphinx originated with the mouth of earth. Originated with the Mount of Earth pyramid as the place of passage, of burial, and of rebirth. 21. That it was known that God had set a watcher to guard this place of passage connecting the abyss to earth and earth to the heavens seems to be implicated in the book of Job, where the patriarch asked, "Am I a sea yam or a sea monster that thou settest a watch over me?" The word chosen by Job to describe the sea, yam, literally refers to the heaven assaulting sea, the tumultuous primitive abyss. 22. The assigning of the pyramid directly behind the Sphinx in Kefren by Egyptologists is directly related to excavations conducted around the statue. Over 3,500 years ago, the first recorded excavations were carried out. Thutmose IV discovered an early restoration stela near the Sphinx that claimed that in very remote times the statue was in very bad need of repair. Thutmose was also called Thutmose, and in the stele of Thutmose IV, we learn that this gigantic statue belongs to Khepra, the very mighty, the greatest of spirits, and the most august. Khepra was regarded as the sole power that was worshipped as eternal. 23. This account serves to show that the Sphinx was found by the earliest Egyptians. It was incredibly mysterious, even provoking early pharaohs to worship it as a god. These old rulers were baffled as to its age. 24. Its existence points to an elder tradition among the Egyptians of a supreme being, for being is the meaning of the word in Egyptian. 25. From a root, kefir, that means transformer. Hold on. Egyptologists adhere to the assumption that the pyramid behind the Sphinx belonged to Kefren only because the restoration stela bore the syllable kaf, a meaningless piece of the text that they claim signifies the name of Kefren, despite the absence of the necessary cartouche that is supposed to surround a royal or deified name. 27. A single syllable, not even qualifying as a hypothetical piece of evidence, has evolved beyond theoretical status to become passed off in all the history books as fact, and this despite that the earliest people calling themselves Egyptians, people of Kemet, recorded that the Sphinx and pyramids were more ancient than Kefren. Even the later Greeks knew the Sphinx was not of Egyptian origin, believing that this silent but colossal statue was solely responsible for killing the ancients. 28. Referring to the Great Deluge. The stele of Thomas declares that the Sphinx was built to commemorate the sacred place of creation, or literally, of the first time. This holy site is said to go back to the time of the Masters of Ker, or Kar, which as a divine locality identifies the Neter Kar of the underworld abyss, a place of exit from Amenta. This Amenta is the hidden underworld, the grave of man's lost world, as Eden is. 29. It was also where the dead are raised again to inherit a second life. In Amenta, it is the duty of the gods to assign thrones to the spirits and to banish the damned to a place set apart from them and to destroy their bodies. 30. In Amenta is located the great deep. 31. Taking all of this into consideration, we see why the earliest Greeks called this statue a sphinx, for it was the duty of this guardian to bind closely together the world of the spirit with that of men. Archaeological evidence affirms the extreme antiquity of the Sphinx and the monuments of Giza about it. Seemingly dateless temples near the Sphinx and pyramids are enormous and exhibit signs that long ago, when they were still old, they were restored with great slabs of stone added to their edifices to prevent further erosion, but these were again taken by later generations for building materials. Though the Egyptians may have renovated these colossal structures, they did not build them. In 1912, another huge temple was excavated, and the stones of its construction were bare of all decoration, one measuring 25 foot long. This temple was carved out of solid rock. 33. An inscription discovered long ago by the Egyptians tells us that the temple was discovered by them in a time when the Sphinx was in bad need of repair, as was already mentioned. 34. Colin Wilson, in his From Atlantis to the Sphinx, wrote that these temples have no architectural identifiers linking them to Egyptian masonry methods or designs. Unlike the elaborately carved cylindrical columns seen all throughout Egypt's oldest surviving buildings, the columns found at Giza from beneath the sands are devoid of all writings and are rectangular. This is definitely not characteristic of Egyptian artisanship. Further, these temples around the pyramids and Sphinx are constructed of stones weighing 200 tons each. 35. Frederick Haberman, in Tracing Our Ancestors on page 63, wrote that the Sphinx is the most important symbol of Eden on earth that we have left, constituting a link between paradise lost and paradise regained. The Sphinx, with a body of a lion and the head of a woman, symbolizes nothing less than the prophecy that from the seed of the woman shall come the Lion of the tribe of Judah to crush the head of the serpent. Haberman wrote that for millennia, 49 centuries, it has faced east, watching for his return. Giza's mysteries are yielding to the light of discovery, but the Sphinx alone cannot unlock its secrets. The paradox lies in that though the Egyptians did not build these monuments, it is with ancient Egypt's oldest inscriptions that we find the keys to understanding the holy mysteries of God and the message and purpose of the Great Pyramid. Sometime in Egypt's obscure past, they were visited by one who knew these secrets, and he passed to them the meanings of these mysteries. And though later generations had lost the interpretations to these teachings, they had faithfully preserved them for future people to study and comprehend. Just as Giza is intimately associated with the realms of the dead, so now we will learn from the esoteric and truly arcane teachings of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. All right. Page 119, Testimony of Thoth. The Egyptian equivalent to the Greek god Hermes was Thoth. As an Egyptian Enoch, Thoth was the lord of the divine books, a mathematician who computed times and seasons, ordained laws for the heavenly bodies, invented the arts and sciences, ordained laws for the heavenly bodies, invented the arts and sciences, and as the scribe of the gods, he was known as the chronicler of heaven and earth. 36. The Alexandrian schools regarded Thoth as the author of all the ancient books in the world. 37. Thoth was actually called in the text of Tehuti, and his name meant the measurer. But others claimed it is more accurately rendered as... Did I miss a page? No. Rendered as erecting. 38. Thoth represented divine intelligence. The oldest rendering of the name was Tot, which identifies him as a god of pillars. 39. As Egypt's most popular figure among the earliest gods, Thoth was said to have built the city of Thebes. The Alexandrian Greeks considered Thoth to have been a human. 40. Plato described him as a conveyor of souls and messenger god who invented arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. 41. Incidentally, the two numbers greatly associated to Enoch were also connected to Thoth by the Egyptians, being 852, sums related to specific secrets in the mysterious chamber now called the King's Chamber. 42. It has long been held that the vast archives of Egyptian esoteric literature come down to us in the collection known as the Book of the Dead, were authored by Thoth, which originally have been inscriptions date back to the First Dynasty. Wallace Budge, in his translation of these writings, wrote that the origin of these works were very old, even in the reign of Semti, an Egyptian king of the First Dynasty. This collection of texts was originally so incredibly vast that it required extensive abbreviation just to condense the writings into a format suitable to early scribes when they covered temple walls, crypts, and pillars with these inscriptions. The archive was copied, recopied, added to the abbreviated more, and so forth for a period of thousands of years. 43. Budge further speculated that the Book of the Dead antedates even the reign of Mena, first king of Egypt. This is a significant claim, for the Egyptian Mena is the same as the Semitic Enem, who, according to the Book of Jasher, was the first king of Egypt who had a son named Osweris, 44. Anthony T. Bowder in Nile Valley contributish. I can't say that word. Contributions to civilization. Contributions. Got it. To civilization on page 269 declares that the correct translation of the title of the Book of the Dead is actually Book of Life. An Albert Churchward in Origin and Evolution of Freemasonry refers to the ancient corpus of writings as the ritual or resurrection of life, claiming on page 169 that they originally composed before the First Dynasty and that it had suffered much editing. The Book of the Dead contains secrets of the afterlife, burial and rebirth, and the other world. All Egyptians, whether king or plowman, queen or maidservant, lived with its teachings and was buried in accordance with its instructions. 45. It is the origin of these fantastic writings that is the true enigma, for the Book of the Dead contains fragments and concepts that are definitely not Egyptian. Even the earliest Egyptians attested as much. Archaeologists discovered within 11th dynasty coffins inscriptions that specifically claimed that portions of the Book of the Dead had been discovered during the reign of Hesepti, the fifth king of the first dynasty. 46. When portions of the Book of the Dead were found in this remote period, it was a wonderful object, a thing of great mystery, the like of which had never before been seen or looked upon. 47. Because these inscriptions were initially found upon this wonderful object and these writings were so extensive that they required editorial abbreviation, we can easily assume that they were found inscribed upon the face of some monument. While this serves to allude to the discovery of the Great Pyramid beneath the sands of the desert after the deluge, our most powerful evidence linking Giza to the Book of the Dead are the writings themselves. Even 125 years ago, historians theorized that some parts of the Genesis text may have been taken from some of the traditional wisdom said to have been contained in the sacred books of the Egyptian Thoth and the records engraved upon the pillars of Set. 48. These pillars of Set are actually the pyramids of Sethites. The title Book of the Dead was not the original name of this collection of vast texts. The abbreviated versions of these inscriptions came to be known as the Book of the Dead because of the origin of these particularly ancient writings from off the faces of a monument built by the ancients who died in the Great Flood. The dead were the authors of these writings. In The Secret of the Bible, author Tony Bushby relates that the Book of Thoth, Enoch, was taken from off of the surfaces of the Great Pyramid, and an ancient name for the Book of the Dead was Paramrid, the phonetic origin of pyramid. Though scholars claim Moses authored the Genesis text, it must be conceded that nowhere in Scripture did Moses claim authorship. There is more evidence that portions of Genesis formed a larger work detailing pre-flood history than there is to claim that the earlier parts of the text were written in the 14th century BC by Moses. Catholic scholar J.T. Millick made a startling discovery concerning portions of the Genesis record. After researching Enochian fragments from various sources of different translations, Millick in 1976 published his conclusions in a 400-page tome that shows the book of the Genesis contains abbreviated versions of the Enochian records and not the other way around. 49. It has long been theorized that the Enochian books were composed during the Alexandrian era, none considering that it is more probable that scribes and translators at Alexandria merely translated very old copies of earlier copies that span back millennia. It was the seat of the most extensive libraries in the ancient world. Millick's discovery was mentioned in Elizabeth Clare Prophet's book Fallen Angels and the Origins of Evil, as well as a curious reference to Augustine's work entitled The City of God, wherein Prophet shows that it was known to the early church fathers that Enoch did leave behind divine writings, but they had not been included into the canon of Scripture because they were so old that their antiquity brought them under suspicion. And on this page, 122 and 123 are two beautiful maps, probably drawn up by old Jason. Just let you soak those in. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get those added into the text in the proper jurisprudence, but I just want to take a moment. They look really good. And I'm sure as I'm reading, I'll be like, oh, I should put this in there, and then I'll get done and I'll forget and all that kind of stuff. So just wanted you to be able to screenshot that if you need it. 124. It is written, nope, it is within the writings of the Book of the Dead that we see with perfect clarity the origin of the Hebraic beliefs that a pillar was erected in Syriad in the middle of the earth that served as a gate to heaven and a border between heaven and earth. In the pyramid of Teta we read, when Teta hath purified himself on the borders of this earth, where Ra hath purified himself, he prayeth and setteth up a ladder. 51. This reference to a ladder is also found in the pyramid of Pepi I, where we read, Hail thee, O ladder of God, stand up, O ladder of Set. Whereon Osiris went forth into heaven, Pepi hath gathered together his bones, he hath collected his flesh, and Pepi hath gone straightway into heaven by means of the two fingers of the God, who is the Lord of the ladder. 52. Earlier, we learned that in Genesis, the patriarch Jacob saw a ladder whereupon angels ascended and descended upon the earth. This is the only reference to a ladder in the entire Bible. This then exhibits that this arcane symbol was so important that it was not allowed to share its image with any other concept. The two fingers of God are identified here in the Egyptian writing as the two larger pyramids at Giza. The Lord of the Ladder is none other than Egypt's oldest deity, Amen, Lord of the Two Mountains. 53. We cannot but assume that these two mountains are the very same Enoch witnessed in his version of the Blessed Land. This reference to the ladder of Set in ancient Egyptian writing is profound, as Amen was the name of the universal deity in Egypt from the most remote times. So too does Set appear to be nearly as old in northern Egypt, where he was held to be a primordial god. 54. Almost everywhere upon Egyptian monuments, the name Set was accompanied by the glyphic representation of a stone. 55. This is interesting because the early inhabitants of Egypt invoked the name of God as Rock of Truth is my name. 56. The name Set has been studied extensively, and its etymology compared with that of other similar words from various cultures. In the 19th century, it was believed that Set in archaic Hebrew as well as the Egyptian meant pillar, but also in a more general sense, its meaning was the erect, elevated, high. 57. This serves to link Set with the figure of Thoth. The Book of the Dead also interchanges Set and Tet Thoth, and some scholars are of the opinion that this relationship identified the two as being one and the same. For Thoth inherited many of the traits formerly associated with Set when the popularity of Set was forgotten. 58. In the 19th century multi-volume work entitled Egypt by Bunsen, we find that up to the 13th century BC, the god Set was a great god universally adored throughout Egypt, who confers on the sovereigns of the 18th and 19th dynasties the symbols of life and power. The most glorious monarch of the later dynasty, Sethos, derives his name from this deity. Bunsen adds, but subsequently, in the course of the 20th dynasty, he is suddenly treated as an evil demon, inasmuch as his effigies and name are obliterated on all the monuments and inscriptions that could be reached. 59. Evidently, Set lost out on the ongoing war between the conflicting priestly factions of Egypt and their competition for the affection of the masses. He was originally a benevolent deity, much sought after by the living and the dead, according to Egyptian texts, even up to the 19th dynasty, but it was the cult of Osiris that prevailed in establishing that Set was the origin of all evil. 60. Set was more easily removed than the elder god Horus, who, after the passage of a couple of centuries, became regarded as the son of Osiris. Anciently, Horus was called Horus, a messianic figure associated to Orion and known as the Lord of the Pillars, the Light of the World, Bruiser of the Serpent, Conqueror of the Dragon, God of the Pole Star, a manifester of the ever-hidden Father. Horus was the first who arose from the dead and established himself forever. 61. Osiris was a perfect name for the Egyptian cults to build upon because he was a verifiable historical personage who was a real human king. The attributes of vanquished deities and persons were assimilated into the characteristics of Osiris. Thus, the old messianic hero Horus became his son. These are pre-Christian beliefs and epithets that can only be explained by realizing that these people once had access to a large arcanum of eschatological information largely forgotten over the millennia. And of course, this would be the surface texts of the Great Pyramid, which were said to contain the histories of heaven and hell and the entire future of the world, and heaven lies up until the time of their collision in what we refer to as the coming apocalypse. In the Book of the Dead, we learn that the souls of the deceased could not ascend to heaven by means of the ladder without an adequate knowledge of the name of the ladder. 62. This was the deepest of occult mysteries, for the name of the ladder was indeed the very name of God, and the Lord's name in the most ancient times was Amen. Unfortunately, for those not having the answer to this spiritual secret, Amen's name simply meant hidden. An Egyptian fragment reads, "Unknown is his name in heaven, whose name is hidden from his creatures, his name which is Amen." 63. This name also has come to be interpreted as hidden secret. In the biblical book of Judges, we read that the angel of the Lord told Samson's parents, "Why dost thou seekest after my name, seeing that it is secret?" 64. Another Egyptian fragment reads, "His name is hidden from his children, and his name, Amen." 65. It was the first god, begetter of the ancient gods. He was called in the older Egyptian writings as the one Lord of heaven and earth. 66. His name is variously Amun, Aman, Amun, and Amen, a god having no beginning and no end. 67. The Israelites went as far as referring to God as the name. The question as to the meaning of the title Amen was not for the masses and uninitiated. The cults and priestly classes closely guarded this secret, and evidently there was debate even among themselves as to the correct translation. However, all of the translations of this archaic epithet hint of a body of very old knowledge concerning a belief in a deity that long ago chose to represent himself in the visage of a stone upon the earth, a rock that mankind could build upon and grow. His true name has never been known, and this was acknowledged by the Egyptians also. A papyrus in the British Museum reads, "His abode is not known. No shrine is found with painted figures of him. There is no building that can contain him. Unknown is his name in heaven. He does not manifest his forms. Vain are all representations of him." 68. The word Amen has become so commonplace in the dialogues of modern Christianity that its true significance has become obscured. We end our prayers over food, at night before sleeping, at the hospital with loved ones, at funeral ceremonies, and at church with Amen. We have preserved this tradition from our Christian forefathers, who in turn adopted it from the Hebrews, who have in their Psalms various passages that end with Amen. Today, it is popularly believed that Amen means, "and may it be so," but this definition is the result of its traditional use and does not at all have anything to do with its original meaning. I'll stop there for today. Can't believe I screwed up that word. Okay, page 126. Later in this research, we will explore the fascinating parallels between rock and spiritual faith and what Christ revealed concerning them. The permanence of stone and the unyielding faith of those who believe in him are integral to one's ascent upon the ladder of Set. because as humans we cannot enter into his presence in purity, and further he knows we are unclean and without a garment to cover our nakedness. There exists an older concept attached to the title Amen: debt cancellation. Amen was the expression used when one accused another for an outstanding debt. The speaking of this word to a debtor signified that his debt was forgiven and canceled. As time passed, the name Amen to the Hebrews became simply a designation for the truth. 74. And in Egypt, Amen later merged with another popular deity to become Amen-Ra, principally worshipped at the Karnak complex in Waset, Thebes, in Upper Egypt to the south. This connection to Ra, a solar deity, is very intriguing, for Ra was worshipped as a stone shaped like a pillar with a pyramidion atop it that stood upon a base of masonry. 75. An obelisk. Though found numerous times in the Old Testament, the name Amen is found only once in the New Testament. The book of the Revelation, the Son of God, is called the Amen. These things saith the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. 76. Amen is represented by the image of the pyramid. The pyramid of Sariad was designed to be a witness at the border of the Lord in Egypt, according to Isaiah the prophet. And this witness was fulfilled with Christ, who is the image of the invisible God. 77. The purpose of the Giza monument is twofold. One, the stone monuments and their guardian conceal in geometrical mysteries the name of the Creator, while also silently promising the diligent that this mystery will one day be made manifest. Giza's other function just may be a literal gate between heaven and earth the underworld. This is purely conjectural, but taking into consideration that this monument was built specifically with the intent of warning future generations of the last day's judgment upon the earth, could this complex actually have some physical engineering function, with its descending passage and subterranean pit for a purpose known only to God on Judgment Day? It is on this day that the Creator becomes a destroyer, and not of the world only, but even the very fabric of the souls of men will on that day be condemned. The purpose of Giza was to hide something of grave importance to humanity, a secret guarded so closely that it is unimaginably obvious to the extent that we are blinded by its truth. Almost suspiciously, the stele near the Sphinx reads, "Thou hast built for thee a place protected in the sacred desert with hidden names." 78. There is something spiritually compelling about the Giza monuments that drives men to travel great distances just to look upon its outer surfaces. For thousands of years, people have come from lands at the edges of the world to see the pyramids. Some of these people compelled their cultures to attempt to replicate these buildings, and soon after, these lesser monuments became centers of pilgrimage. Several hundred pyramids wrap around the world within the geographical area known as the Pyramid Belt, extending from China all the way up to the dense jungles and high mountains of America. Pyramids within this belt have even been discovered on dozens of seemingly insignificant islands and even under the sea. This massive pyramid copying campaign ended abruptly with massive geological upheavals and flooding all along the equatorial zones of the pyramid belt, tremendous earthquakes and volcanism that has occurred periodically since the Great Deluge. In Abu Feda's Historia Anti-Islamitica, it is stated that Syria was one of the earliest inhabited countries, and that the Syriac language was the first that was spoken, that the Sabaean language was established by Seth and Edris, Enoch, that there was a town called Haran to which pilgrims resorted, as they did so to the large pyramids of Giza. Giza? It must be one of which was said to be the tomb of Edris. 79. This was confirmed by another Arab writer who said that pilgrims made trips to visit the Great Pyramid. This was Ibn Atalif, and he claimed to have read in the books of the Sabaeans that one of the pyramids was the tomb of Agatha-daimon, the other of Hermes. Agatha-daimon was the person of Seth, 80, and Hermes would herein be Enoch. Edris, the Enoch of the Arabic Quran, was not buried there, but the mentioning of his name in reference to the pyramids at Giza serves to show that even the Arabian religious writings, at least in part, were ultimately borrowed from a parent source. Haran was the land of the Chaldeans and is the origin of the people historians have come to call Hurrians. Harans. It was also where Abraham lived with his father Terah. Abraham lived during the reign of King Nimrod, who was several years earlier the king of Akkad and is identified on Sumerian records as Amar Udak. Amar Udadak. I've heard him mention that. Occasionally, actually, shit. Get myself confused. Actually, the Hebrew patriarch Abram was also of direct Sumerian descent, and as was most of Babylonia. Why'd I get confused? I looked at something different, and then I tried to come back, and it didn't work out. I'm going to keep going, though. I don't care. He was called a Hebrew, meaning sojourner, and as such, he lived up to this name, for he traveled and spent years of his life in Canaan, Philistia, Egypt, and Syria. Too many today assume the early Hebrews were racially different than the Babylonians, and such is false, for Abram was Chaldean, a holy man separated from his culture by a fervent yearning to obey the will of God. Of great interest to this study is that Abram went to Egypt according to Genesis, and other Hebraic records tell that he traveled to Egypt more than once. The book of Jasher reveals that Abram was famous throughout Babylonia and Canaan for his testimony against the evils of the king of Babylon, Nimrod, Amar Udaak, and for his part in the defeat of the Elamite Confederation, recorded in Genesis 14 when the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were taken captive and then returned safely by the valor of Abraham, his household servants trained in war, and his Amorite allies in Canaan. He was raised in the house of Noah, who was at that time very old and looked after by the Semitic peoples living in Canaan. Under Noah's tutoring, Abram became learned in the secrets and sciences of the antediluvian world. He became a student of pre-flood astronomy and was initiated into the hidden mysteries of time-keeping under the early draconian calendrical systems and the newer post-apocalyptic modified systems, and all scribal lore and chronological histories. Noah and Shem taught Abram firsthand the history of the world before the flood and the prophetic writings of their forefathers concerning the end of the world and the return of God to earth. Abram also studied the writings of Enoch, 81, which were at the time inscriptions also studied by his great-grandson Simeon, 82. The Quran tells that Abraham left behind a book of writings himself, 83. Much of the teachings of Noah were from the books that he preserved upon the ark, 84. Noah's wisdom and knowledge was immense. Having lived under the pristine climate and atmospheric conditions of the world prior to the deluge, he was a man born under better genetic circumstances that allowed him to live so long. He was already 600 years old at the cataclysm, and if the Sumerian records are true, Noah was a king of the city of Shurappak long prior to the flood. Having spent 40 years learning from this ancient man, Abram himself was a remarkable repository of information. He was the only man on earth 350 years after the flood when Noah died to fully grasp the vast spectrum of the mysteries of God both before and after the deluge. Abram visited Egypt, and it is the author's belief that such an incredible man could never have left Egypt unaffected. Hebraic traditional writings hold that Abraham went to Egypt and taught the astrologers and wise men of Pharaoh's court great secrets of God hidden in the stars and celestial motions. Such a claim is also confirmed in the Masonic document called the Wood Manuscript, which dates from 610 AD. The Wood Manuscript claims that the sciences and knowledge taught by Abraham had been derived from one of the pillars that had been discovered, and that as one learned in the scribal mysteries of the Sumerians, Abraham understood these writings and related them to the Egyptians, 85. This pillar was one of the Giza pyramids covered in minute inscriptions from the pre-flood world seen by the baffled Greek and Roman historians almost 2,000 years later. The Masonic Indigo Jones document cited the same information. However, Abraham here is substituted for Hermes. It is clear that Abraham is the subject of the context. However, because the text claims the antediluvian writings were found upon excavated pillars that were translated by a minister to Oswiris, Oswiris, close enough, king of Egypt, during the reign of Ninus, who was Nimrod according to the Assyrians, 86. Alexandrian historians identified two distinct Hermes figures. The first was the builder of the pillars, and the second was much later. It was the second Hermes that found the pillars and translated them, according to Iamblichus, who wrote that this second Hermes lived after the flood, 87. And this would no doubt be Abraham, who according to this Inigo Jones document, taught the ancient Egyptians the zodiac and the secrets of the stars, hieroglyphics, and diverse sciences. Such is further substantiated in the book of Jasher, which states that in the days of Abraham, the king of Egypt was Oswiris, the son of Anam, Mena, 88. The Jasher account extensively outlines Nimrod's life and reign and even his personal experiences with Abram, the son of one of his favored Babylonian war generals. The connection between Osiris, second ruler of Egypt, and Nimrod of Chaldea is nothing short of astonishing. But even more incredible is the evidence that this minister to the Egyptian ruler was in fact Abraham. Cyrillus Alexandrinus in Contra Julianum 89 wrote that long ago a powerful Chaldean visited Egypt, a man of immense wisdom. Such a historical reference would not have been recorded if this stranger had not left a powerful impact upon the Egyptian people at such a remote time in their culture's infancy. Many Chaldeans have visited Egypt. In such an incredibly wise man of learning did visit Pharaoh's court, then such an event could not have remained unacknowledged in Egypt's archives. Setting aside the apparent anachronisms so prevalent in interpretations of Egyptian history, we learn that in an Egyptian record called the Westcar Papyrus does tell that during the reign of Khufu, a foreigner visited Egypt, a venerable man of 110 years in age who was believed to be able to perform miracles but was known greatly for his vast wisdom. Of particular fascination to the sages of Pharaoh's court was the fact that the stranger to Egypt was acquainted with the mysteries of Thoth, Enoch, 90. Abraham was a Chaldean by birth and a savant of the mysteries of Enoch through Noah and Enoch's inscriptions upon the tablets kept safe by the Sethites after the flood. At age 110, Abraham was living among the Philistines at the eastern borders of the land of Egypt, so it is not improbable that he could have spent a considerable amount of time translating these pyramid inscriptions at Giza for the Egyptians. The Greek historian Herodotus may have inadvertently recorded this as well. Concerning the pyramids at Giza, he wrote that they had been built by one called Philetian, which merely is a Grecian title meaning native of Ion near Giza, 91. In Civilization or Barbarism, Cheke Antediop on page 281 wrote that it was Philistus who brought the secrets of the calendar into Egypt, exactly what is said of Thoth, Hermes, and Enoch. The Westcar Papyrus reveals that this 110-year-old man knew the number of the chambers of Thoth, some Egyptologists interpreting this to mean secret chambers of the primeval sanctuary, according to Zechariah Sitchin in the Wars of Gods and Men. This visitor to Egypt of old claimed to know where the plans with numbers were hidden. This no doubt was what Abraham found inside the primeval sanctuary or Great Pyramid. It is quite possible that he did not build these monuments, but because of his own fame, he later became identified with them. All of this further identifies Abraham, who was a shepherd and a nomad who was living in that area at the Philistine city of Gerar when he was 110. It is obvious that after the passage of so many years, the historical accounts of different scribes and records would have become slightly confused. It is not a stretch of the imagination to assume that the Egyptians would have later credited this stranger with building the monuments if he had been remembered as the one who translated the mysterious writings found upon them. All evidence points to all evidence points that the enigmatic writings of the Book of the Dead, as well as some of the older biblical records and the ancient writings of many early civilizations, merely borrowed their source material from the inscriptions preserved through the flood that were engraved into the faces of the Great Pyramid. Though Egyptologists claim that the writings that constitute the Book of the Dead were so extensive that they required editing and abbreviation into shorter works to be adequately used, this appears to be the case with most of the world's oldest historical writings. This is especially the case with the little understood and mysterious Edfu wall text. Discovered in Upper Egypt to the far south of Egypt was an archive of ancient glimpses into an even earlier past that appear to have been unique to Edfu. Even more peculiar is that Edfu writings tell of the plans for a great temple that predated the other temples of Egypt that dropped out of heaven near Memphis, and that Imhotep built this edifice according to these plans. 92. Memphis is the area of the Giza Plateau, only a few miles between them. What's interesting is that these Edfu records were found on the far side of Egypt to the deep south, on the edges of Nubia instead of near Memphis. These plans are the divine instructions received by Enoch concerning the architectural dimensions of the Great Pyramid. The Edfu inscriptions tell of a distant history of Egypt concerning the first time, Zetepi, the primordial sages, primeval gods, and the abysmal waters of the Nun that existed prior to the creation of our world, of alien gods before the Egyptian deities, an enemy in the visage of a serpent, and a great conflict that brought this earlier world to a devastating end. Linking these writings to the Book of the Dead and Great Pyramid is the fact that these writings are attributed to Thoth. Andrew Collins in Gods of Eden, Egypt's Lost Legacy and the Genesis of Civilization, cites these strange writings and goes on to write that all of the inhabitants of this earlier world perished when the world was brought back out of the darkness of ruin. The world contained the ghosts of this earlier civilization. The only relic to have survived this judgment was a single Giza pillar located in the field of reeds. 93. This would serve to identify the delta area and surrounding regions where Giza lies, for the field of reeds is adjacent to the Sea of Reeds, commonly referred to in the scriptures as the Red Sea, crossed by the Israelites fleeing Egypt. The story is the same the world over, but the more it is told, the more fascinating the parallels become. The Babylonian historian Berosus wrote that the god Cronus bade Exisosthorus, Noah, to set down a writing of the beginning, middle, and end of all things before the flood. This god told his earthly servant that after the deluge he was to recover the writings and publish them for men to see. The account reads that these writings were located after the catastrophe and dup up. 94. Assuming Argendo, I can't say that word, Arguendo, that these were merely small books, why not just take them upon the ark? This author believes that these books were not small, nor was it possible to have taken such a vast archive of knowledge through the cataclysm, but that they were meticulously inscribed upon the Great Pyramid, and that there were originally 4 of these gigantic books that correspond to the 4 faces of the monument, just as there were 4 Gospels giving men different versions of the same messianic story, and there stand 4 watcher guardians around the throne of God. Though embellishments crept into this account and exaggerations focused on localizing the tradition to Babylon rather than on the material facts that corroborate the hundreds of other legends and myths from other nations in antiquity, we find additional collaboration. I'm sorry. Let's see, I'm going to go back and redo that. focused on localizing the tradition to Babylon rather than on the material facts that collaborate the hundreds of other legends and myths from other nations in antiquity. We find additional collaboration in India, where again the same operable facts remain the same, but the traditions are centrally focused within the subcontinent. There is an immense aura of mystery attached to India. Its culture is an enduring one and hold on. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that part tomorrow. All right, page 132. There is an immense aura of mystery attached to India. Its culture is an enduring one, and recently research has shown the apparent relationships between the Indian and Sumerian pictographic languages. 95. In fact, no other civilization exists today aside from India that so closely mirrored ancient Sumer. They have maintained their traditions for millennia, beliefs derived from the mysterious Sanskrit and Vedic writings, whereas those nations surrounding them have almost entirely succumbed to the relatively newer Islamic faith. India is a window into the past. The Vedic scriptures are commonly believed by those in India as being external, having existed in the mind of the deity since the beginning. They were considered the knowledge of God himself, divine information imparted unto the rishis, who in turn took this knowledge and wrote the four Vedas from the four mouths of Brahma, the creator. The seven rishis took this knowledge and wrote it down for the benefit of mankind. Brahma was believed to have four faces, which this author believes is a signal characteristic that links the creator to the Great Pyramid symbolism. Even in the book of Revelation, the throne of God has four faces. Hold on. The Great Pyramid does not factor in anywhere in the Vedic writings, however. The ideas of which they embody is clearly seen in these arcane texts. The four Vedas of Brahma are said in these writings to have sprung from the Gayatri shortly after Brahma finished framing the world. The most sacred meter in the Vedic text is the Gayatri, the metrical speech consisting of 3 times 8 syllables. The Aryans believed that the syllables of words could be measured out in the form of divine speech. The Gayatri speech is associated to fire and express the idea of Brahma. Interestingly, the Vedic man had to employ the sacred metrical speech when attempting to acquire sacred knowledge and thorough understanding of all problems of theology. 96. Like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was clearly copied from an older source from an entirely different language, so too were the original Vedic records in an alien language very different from the Sanskrit that they had presently survived in. Translator Ralph Griffith wrote in his The Vedas, 1892, that the language of the Vedas is an older dialect varying very considerably, both in the grammatical and lexical character from the classical Sanskrit. Its grammatical peculiarities run through all departments. 97. For the critic who still remains unyielding to such a connection between Giza and these most ancient writings from India and other classical civilizations, I defer now to the actual Sanskrit in order to banish any further disbelief. The Great Pyramid was designed to convey knowledge and was long ago called an altar by old Semitic cultures. With this in mind, we find it an amazing parallel to learn that the Sanskrit word for Veda is in fact knowledge, which incidentally is a very old word etymologically related to the Sanskrit Vedi, or altar. Further, like the Book of the Dead writings discovered and excavated by the early Egyptians, the Vedic beliefs were that gods long ago dug up the Vedic writings. 98. This too is the testimony of the Hindus who assert that their holy books long ago were recovered from the bottom of the ocean after the flood, as found in the classic research of Ignatius Donnelly in the Antediluvian World on page 303. Yikes. Although the most sacred of the holy books was the Rig Veda, which has exactly 10,800 verses in Sanskrit, ancient scriptures told to correspond to the 10,800 bricks of the altar of the fire god Agni. 99. This altar is that spoken of This altar is that spoken of by the prophet Isaiah that stands in the land of Egypt. Abraham was an initiate into the Arcanum. He knew that the altar of God in Egypt and its hidden identity as the pillar of Enoch that represented the holy mountain of heaven and its function as a terrestrial gateway between heaven and earth with the underworld. He translated these mysteries for the Egyptians and wrote his own records as well, which have been preserved in Genesis and within obscure passages in the oldest Psalms. There is every possibility that he discovered the writings of the Apocalypse upon the faces on these stones of the pyramid. The Revelation as recorded by John is truly a masterpiece of ancient symbolism and extinct motifs. It was written in Greek, but the Greeks nor Hebrews could have understood it 2,000 years ago because the language of symbolism employed is specifically of Sumerian origin. The end of the world was written in the signs, motifs, symbols, and language of imagery that could have only truly been comprehended by those who lived in the beginning prior to the deluge. Unfortunately, this shocking and informative study is the subject of an entirely different book and is not the objective of the present study. Suffice it to say that we infer this from the fact that according to the manifold sources already cited in this book, upon the faces of the Great Pyramid was written the past, the present, and the future. The knowledge, Vedas, was revealed by Abraham, and after centuries past, the priests of India preserved his name in the name they referred to as God, Brahma, which had its origin in Abraham. The Abraham of Genesis is alluded to there can be no doubt. His wife was Sarah, just as the Vedic god Brahma was married to Saraswati. Abraham's ministry to Earth's earliest post-apocalyptic civilizations was no accident, for the work of Abraham's translation of these holy mysteries to the world was the result of an Enochian prophecy foretold almost a millennium prior to the flood. The book of the Secrets of Enoch reads that after the flood shall arise another generation much afterwards. He who raised that generation, Abraham, shall reveal to them the books of thy handwriting, Enoch's, as thy fathers, to them to whom he must point out the guardianship of the world, to the faithful men and workers of my pleasure, who do not acknowledge my name in vain. 100. The early Egyptians learned through the wise Abraham the contents of the glyphic writings at Giza and immediately incorporated these mysteries into their theology. These translations often meant nothing to the Egyptians other than that they were of divine importance and were words and phrases needed in the afterlife. Egyptologists admit that it was often the case that even Egyptian scribes long ago meticulously preserved hieroglyphic text, even though they themselves did not quite understand the meanings of the text themselves. These inscriptions were placed inside tombs upon temple walls as walk-in books, within coffins, on artwork, on beads, inside crypts, and on obelisks that were erected everywhere throughout Egypt. One can read the Book of the Dead, which is a compilation of these texts from all over Egypt from what has come to be called the Papyrus of Ani, and see clearly that these writings have little, if anything, to do with Egypt. They are full of obscure imagery like the Ladder of Set and Pillars of Thoth that hint to an older theology, one extant long prior to the traditional Egyptian pantheon. There is a mystery these writings seek to explain that involves the secrets of resurrection in the name of God, the divine key to the arcanum known as a life eternal. When Abraham first laid eyes on the excavation at Giza and witnessed the pyramids rising out of the sands of the desert waste almost 4,000 years ago, he knew he was looking at the earthly model of the city of God placed there by his antediluvian Sethite forebears, the spiritual city where the eternal righteous will dwell. Lith, 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. 101. a perfect equilateral cube. The Great Pyramid is a shadow of this greater and future reality. The celestial city of the Greeks is the same as the divine tree of the Hebrews, both being images of the same archetype, an ideal cosmology as noted by John Mitchell in The Dimensions of Paradise. The Gnostics, too, shared this concept. The Pistis Sophia text reads, "For God shall save their souls from all matters, and a city shall be prepared in the light, and all the souls saved will dwell in the city and inherit it. And the soul of them who receive mysteries will abide in that region." The pyramid at Giza embodied terrestrial mysteries, and its angle relates specifically to the earth. But the pyramidal city of God will be perfect, all its points equidistant. In the New Testament book of Hebrews is a curious fragment that reads that Abraham did look for a city whose builder and maker was God, 102. Because we have no biblical references to such a historic quest by the patriarch, we know that he did not look with earthly eyes. Abraham looked upon the monuments of Giza with spiritual sight and prophetically witnessed the coming of the city of God.